I trace phantom liabilities for a living. My name is Rosa James. I am 32 years old, and I work as a senior commercial bank auditor in downtown Baltimore, Maryland. My daily routine involves dissecting complex corporate ledgers, untangling high-level embezzlement, and watching desperate executives lie on federal tax disclosures to hide money they do not possess. I know exactly what financial deception looks like, long before the ink dries on a balance sheet. The morning started with a fractured schedule. A delayed transit alert pushed my routine into a hurried sprint. I grabbed my tailored charcoal coat, poured black coffee into a travel mug, and snatched my matte black smartphone off the marble kitchen counter. My husband Bradley stood near the sink, adjusting his silk tie. He is 35 years old and works as a regional sales director. We exchanged a brief kiss. I hurried out the front door and braced against the frigid Maryland wind. I boarded the commuter train just as the doors slid shut. I found a seat near the window and watched the frozen suburban landscape blur past the glass. The train car was silent, filled with professionals nursing their morning caffeine. I reached into my pocket to check my early meeting itinerary. I pulled out the device. It was encased in a sleek, matte black shell, identical to the one I purchased for myself last month. The screen remained locked. A notification banner hovered over the background image. The background was not my firm logo. It was a photograph of Bradley holding a craft beer at a summer barbecue. I had grabbed his phone by mistake. I slipped it back into my palm, planning to email him from my office laptop to arrange a swap during my lunch hour. The steel wheels of the train rattled over the tracks. Suddenly, the device vibrated against my fingers. The screen illuminated with an incoming call. The caller identification displayed the name Vanessa. Vanessa is 30 years old. She is Bradley's younger sister. She treats every minor inconvenience as a catastrophic event and expects her brother to subsidize her endless string of failed boutique business ventures. I assumed she was calling to complain about our upcoming family dinner arrangements. I tapped the green accept icon, intending to correct the phone mix-up and direct her to my office line. I brought the speaker to my ear. Before a single syllable could leave my lips, Vanessa spoke. Her voice rushed through the receiver, thin and breathless. "Did the $215,000 wire clear the escrow account yet?" she demanded, skipping any standard greeting. "You need to verify the routing numbers right now. Natalie texted me again this morning. She is threatening to pull the boy out of his current program and enroll him in that other private preschool if the tuition is not paid by Friday. We cannot risk her blowing this entire arrangement up right before my studio lease is finalized." I did not drop the phone. I did not gasp. I sat perfectly still in my seat. The cold draft from the train window chilled the side of my face. Welcome back to Vega Vengeance, where loyalty is tested and bank records reveal the truth. If you have ever trusted someone who was secretly building a parallel life behind your back, you will understand this story. Drop your city and age in the comments, hit subscribe, and watch how a quiet auditor dismantles an entire family of parasites. I kept the phone pressed against my ear. I did not demand an explanation about the $215,000. I did not ask who Natalie was or why my husband was funding a secret child's private education. A professional auditor knows that interrupting a suspect only provides them an opportunity to fabricate a defense. I raised my left wrist. I tapped the red circle on my Apple Watch interface. The application began capturing pristine audio of the conversation. I let her keep talking, documenting the exact dimensions of the betrayal unfolding in the shadows. The steel wheels of the commuter train rattled against the tracks, providing a steady mechanical metronome for my racing thoughts. The car plunged into a long tunnel approaching the city limits, casting my reflection against the dark glass of the window. I lowered my wrist and silenced the recording application on my watch. I did not drop the device. I did not bury my face in my hands or weep into my scarf. My husband was funneling $215,000 to an unknown woman named Natalie to fund a secret child's private education. The sheer audacity of the sum demanded cold, structural analysis. I sat in my seat and stared at the dark screen of his smartphone. I needed to see the architecture of his lie. The device was locked, requiring a numeric passcode. Bradley had changed his security settings 3 months ago, claiming his regional sales director position mandated stricter corporate data protocols. I knew the truth. Men who build parallel lives rely on predictable patterns because genuine creativity requires far too much effort. I thought about the man I married. I considered his deep, unwavering dependence on his mother's approval. Helen treated her son like a prized possession, and Bradley worshipped her authority. I typed her birth year into the keypad, 1959. The matte black smartphone unlocked instantly, bypassing all his supposed high-level corporate security. Crossing this digital boundary meant the end of my marriage. I understood the gravity of the action, but the marriage was already a hollow structure, built on a foundation of sand. I opened his photo gallery application. The main grid was an immaculate collection of curated memories. There were pictures of our recent weekend trip to Annapolis. There were snapshots of his expensive golf clubs and his polished sports car parked in our driveway. It was the flawless digital footprint of a devoted, successful suburban husband. A commercial bank auditor knows that the public ledger is always a distraction. The real data is kept hidden in the shadows. I navigated to the internal album settings. I scrolled past the shared folders and located a hidden encrypted directory. It required the passcode a second time. I entered Helen's birth year again. The folder sprang open, revealing hundreds of concealed images. I stared at the glowing screen. My heart maintained a slow, measured rhythm. The most recent uploads documented a lavish birthday celebration. The event took place at an expensive indoor trampoline park. Custom banners hung from the walls, and catered food covered the long presentation tables. I swiped through the high-resolution photographs. The images captured a young boy turning 4 years old. I zoomed in tightly on the child's face. The genetic math was undeniable. He possessed Bradley's exact strong jawline, the specific downward slope of his nose, and his distinct dark eyes. The boy was a biological copy. A 4-year-old child meant my husband initiated this secondary life during the exact period I was working 60-hour weeks to secure our primary mortgage. While I was drafting endless audit reports to build our financial foundation, he was busy creating a shadow family. I swiped to the next photo. Standing beside Bradley and the boy was an attractive woman with long blonde hair. She wore designer fitness apparel and smiled radiantly at the camera. This was Natalie, the woman demanding preschool tuition by Friday. But the infidelity was merely the surface layer of the betrayal. I continued swiping my finger across the glass. The next image stopped the breath in my lungs. Standing near the mountain of wrapped presents were my in-laws, Helen and Vanessa. My mother-in-law wore a bright floral blouse and a look of profound, unadulterated joy. She was holding a large wrapped gift box, offering it to the illegitimate child. Vanessa stood next to her, laughing warmly and holding a glass of sparkling cider. They were posing for a formal family portrait with the mistress and the secret grandson. I saw pictures of Natalie wearing an expensive diamond pendant. I saw Helen hugging Natalie, their heads pressed together in familiar intimacy. Vanessa was caught candidly passing a piece of cake to the boy. It was a level of inclusion they had never once extended to me. In 5 years of marriage, Helen had never hugged me with that kind of genuine warmth. I was merely the appliance that kept the lights on in their theater. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. The memories of the past 4 years replayed in my mind with terrifying clarity. Helen had always treated me with a thin layer of practiced condescension. During our mandatory Sunday dinners, she would serve cheap frozen meals in expensive dishes and praise Bradley's relentless work ethic. She routinely urged me to step back from my corporate career to focus on supporting her son. She acted as though my income was merely a cute hobby. Vanessa treated me like an unending line of credit. She constantly demanded that Bradley subsidize her failing boutique business ventures, always expecting our joint accounts to absorb her chaotic debts. They sat at my dining table, drank my expensive wine, and smiled to my face while harboring this sprawling secret. They actively participated in the deception. They welcomed Natalie with open arms. They celebrated the existence of the shadow child. Worst of all, they enthusiastically conspired to use my grueling labor to fund the entire charade. They viewed me as nothing more than an unbothered cash machine. I was a reliable workhorse, designated to generate the capital required to sustain their illusions. I thought about the $215,000. If Bradley was moving that much liquid capital into an escrow account, he was attempting a major asset acquisition. A house, a condo, something permanent for Natalie and the boy. The fact that Vanessa was tracking the routing numbers meant she was functioning as his accomplice, perhaps utilizing her own failing businesses as shell entities to wash the funds. The entire family was a criminal syndicate wrapped in suburban knitwear. The automated voice over the train intercom announced the impending arrival at the Baltimore Transit Hub. I locked the smartphone and slid it deep into the pocket of my tailored charcoal coat. The metallic wheels screeched against the tracks as the train slowed to a halt. The heavy steel doors of the commuter train slid open. I stepped onto the concrete platform. The cold air smelled of diesel exhaust and roasted coffee from a nearby kiosk. I joined the sea of dark coats marching toward the escalators. I smoothed the fabric of my coat, ensuring not a single wrinkle betrayed my internal state. The heartbroken wife who boarded the train in the suburbs was gone. The woman stepping onto the platform was a senior auditor preparing for a hostile corporate takeover. I walked with the precise, measured stride of a professional who possessed all the necessary data to dismantle an opponent. My husband believed he had orchestrated the perfect deception. He believed his dutiful wife was too exhausted by her spreadsheets to notice the missing funds. He failed to comprehend that my spreadsheets were the exact weapons I would use to destroy him. I did not call Bradley to demand a tearful explanation. I did not text Helen to ask how she could possibly justify her actions. Confrontation without leverage is a tactical error. It allows the guilty party to construct a defense and destroy the evidence. I walked out into the frigid Maryland morning. The wind whipped against my face, but I did not shiver. I needed to understand the exact origin of the funds Vanessa mentioned on the phone. A sum that large does not materialize out of thin air. It requires extraction. It leaves a paper trail. I headed straight for my corporate office building. I had to secure the blueprints of his fraud before he ever realized the vault was open. The glass doors of the commercial banking high-rise slid open, admitting me into a sterile lobby that smelled of floor wax and roasted espresso. I bypassed the morning crowds gathered near the ground floor cafe and stepped directly into the express elevator. The brushed steel doors closed, shutting out the ambient noise of downtown Baltimore. As the car ascended to the executive auditing tier, I focused on the steady numeric progression illuminating the digital floor indicator. The heartbroken spouse who had boarded the commuter train 40 minutes earlier was gone. The woman stepping out onto the 42nd floor was a senior commercial bank auditor preparing to dismantle a sprawling financial conspiracy. I walked down the carpeted corridor. I did not stop at the communal break room to exchange pleasantries with my colleagues. I ignored the fresh coffee brewing on the counter and the idle chatter about upcoming weekend plans. I reached my corner office, stepped inside, and pushed the heavy oak door shut. I engaged the deadbolt. The metallic click echoed sharply in the quiet room. I lowered the motorized window blinds, plunging the space into a cool, muted shadow. I placed my tailored charcoal coat on the back of my ergonomic chair and sat down at my workstation. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. $215,000 is a highly specific sum. Capital of that magnitude does not simply materialize from a standard joint checking account without triggering immediate internal overdraft alerts. Extracting a six-figure sum requires leverage. It requires collateral. My husband worked as a regional sales director. He possessed a respectable salary, but his income was heavily structured around quarterly performance bonuses that he routinely squandered on expensive golf trips and leased sports cars. He did not possess the liquid assets to wire that kind of money to an escrow account. He needed an anchor to secure the cash, and I knew exactly what anchor he had chosen. I bypassed the standard consumer banking portal and utilized my high-level security clearance to access the commercial mainframe. This proprietary network allows senior auditors to trace institutional liabilities and verify complex property liens across the state of Maryland. The interface is a rigid, unforgiving ledger of black text against a gray background. I did not search for my husband's accounts. I typed my own 9-digit Social Security number into the primary query field. The server processed the request, cross-referencing municipal databases and regional lending institutions. The results populated on my monitor. My eyes scanned the active trade lines. There was my primary mortgage, drawn 5 years ago. Beneath it sat a brand new entry. It was a secondary lien recorded just 14 days prior. The document type was classified as a home equity line of credit. The principal balance registered at exactly $215,000. The collateral securing this newly minted debt was my premarital Maryland townhouse. I bought that brick townhouse when I was 26 years old. I saved the down payment by working grueling 60-hour weeks auditing escrow logs, while my peers spent their evenings in crowded bars. The property featured original hardwood floors and a small, quiet garden. It was the physical manifestation of my independence. When Bradley and I married, he subtly but persistently complained about the modest square footage. He suggested multiple times that we leverage the equity to upgrade to a sprawling suburban estate. I always refused. I kept the deed exclusively in my name, maintaining the townhouse as a protected sanctuary. Bradley viewed my financial boundary not as a prudent decision, but as a personal insult to his authority. I clicked the hyperlink to view the digitized loan origination documents. The scanned pages loaded one by one. I bypassed the standard lending clauses, the interest rate disclosures, and the generic default warnings. I navigated directly to the final signature block at the bottom of the borrower acknowledgement page. My printed legal name sat on the designated line. Hovering just above it was a signature executed in dark blue ink. Forgery is an act of supreme arrogance. The perpetrator assumes the audience will only verify the general shape of the letters, rather than study the mechanics of the pen stroke. The individual who signed this home equity application attempted to replicate the fluid cursive I developed in college. They managed to copy the sharp angle of my initial capital letters, but they failed to suppress their own muscle memory. The subsequent lowercase letters possessed a distinct, aggressive downward slant, leaning heavily toward the right margin. I knew that specific downward slant. I had seen it on anniversary cards, utility checks, and grocery lists for half a decade. It was Bradley's handwriting. My husband had sat at a desk, held a pen, and meticulously drawn my name to extract $250,000 from a house he did not own. A forged signature cannot secure a 6-figure mortgage without an accomplice. The county clerk and the lending institution require a state-sanctioned witness to authenticate the borrower's identity. I scrolled down to the notary acknowledgement section, located in the bottom left corner of the page. A circular purple seal was stamped over the text. It displayed the name of a licensed Maryland notary public, along with a sequential commission number. I stared at the printed name. The puzzle pieces snapped together with cold, terrifying precision. The name belonged to a woman who previously co-owned a failed holistic day spa with my sister-in-law, Vanessa. They had accrued insurmountable debts before dissolving the partnership 3 years ago. I opened a secondary browser window and accessed the Maryland Secretary of State portal. I queried the notary identification number. The database generated a matching profile, but the status column displayed a glaring red warning code. The commission had been revoked 18 months ago due to severe ethical violations involving improper identification protocols. The seal pressed onto my home equity loan was entirely counterfeit. Bradley had not acted alone in a moment of desperate panic. He had orchestrated a premeditated financial conspiracy. He coordinated with his sister, located a disgraced former business associate, secured a fabricated rubber stamp, and manufactured a legally binding financial instrument out of thin air. The scope of the betrayal elevated instantly. This was no longer a grim tale of domestic infidelity. My husband was not just cheating on me. By utilizing my Social Security number to secure the loan, he committed felony identity theft. By transmitting those forged documents to a federally insured commercial lender, he committed federal bank fraud. But tracing the extraction is only half of the forensic equation. An auditor must always trace the destination. I returned to the commercial mainframe and pulled the escrow disbursement instructions attached to the fraudulent credit line. The regional bank had wired the $215,000 to an external holding account 2 days ago. The receiving entity was not a personal checking account. It was a registered corporate holding company named Summit Logistics, LLC. I accessed the state business registry and searched the entity name. The limited liability company was formed less than 3 weeks ago. The registered agent listed on the corporate charter was Vanessa. The entire criminal architecture was now illuminated. Bradley stole the equity from my premarital sanctuary. He funneled the stolen capital to his sister. Vanessa utilized a freshly minted shell corporation to wash the funds, creating a layer of digital separation between the theft and the purchase. And the purchase was glaringly obvious. The frantic phone call I had recorded on the commuter train provided the motive. Vanessa had asked if the wire cleared the escrow account because Natalie was threatening to pull the secret son out of his private preschool. Bradley was buying his mistress a luxury condominium. He was purchasing a permanent, upscale shelter for his shadow family using the exact brick and mortar foundation I had spent my 20s building. He intended to launder my stolen equity through his sister's fake company to secure a deed for Natalie. I sat back in my chair. The ergonomic mesh provided firm support against my spine. I did not shed a single tear. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply structural, that it bypassed the emotional centers of my brain entirely. It registered as a complex mathematical equation that required immediate, ruthless balancing. I initiated the printing sequence on my secure network. The heavy-duty laser machine resting on my credenza whirred to life. The mechanical hum cut through the silence of my office, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of impending justice. I watched the crisp white pages emerge from the output tray. I printed the forged home equity application, highlighting the downward slant of the fabricated signature. I printed the state disciplinary record, proving the notary suspension. I printed the escrow wire transfer logs and the corporate registry filing exposing Vanessa's shell company. I stood up and collected the warm sheets of paper. I utilized a 3-hole punch to prepare the left margins. I opened the bottom drawer of my glass desk and retrieved a pristine black legal binder. I use black binders exclusively for cases involving systemic, unmitigated fraud. I placed the documents inside and snapped the silver metal rings shut. The sound was sharp and definitive. The binder now contained the complete anatomy of a federal indictment. If I walked into the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and handed this compilation to a duty agent, Bradley and Vanessa would be arrested before the end of the fiscal quarter. They would face mandatory minimum prison sentences, asset forfeiture, and total social ruin. A normal betrayed spouse would grab the binder drive directly back to the townhouse and throw the evidence onto the kitchen counter. They would scream until their vocal cords frayed, demanding a tearful explanation and an immediate apology. I did not reach for my car keys. Confrontation without a finalized strategy is a catastrophic tactical error. If I accuse Bradley right now, the trap would spring prematurely. He would realize his blueprint was compromised. He would immediately contact Vanessa, instruct her to transfer the liquid cash out of the shell company, and hire a ruthless criminal defense attorney. They would attempt to destroy secondary evidence and construct a collaborative lie to muddy the legal waters. They would drag me into years of agonizing civil litigation, attempting to force a settlement just to make the nightmare end. I refuse to grant them the advantage of preparation. I prefer a documented paper trail over a screaming match. I needed them to believe their stage set was still perfectly intact. I needed them to feel invincible. I closed the cover of the black binder and locked it inside the lower drawer of my desk. I smoothed the front of my blouse and checked my reflection in the dark glass of the window. My face was a blank professional wall. My pulse was a slow, deliberate metronome. I packed my laptop into my briefcase. The workday was concluding. I had to leave my sanctuary, return to the townhouse, and look the man who forged my signature directly in the eyes. I had to smile, cook dinner, and pretend I was nothing more than his oblivious, exhausted wife. The investigation phase was complete. The performance was about to begin. The evening commute back to the Maryland suburbs felt remarkably different than my frantic morning departure. I navigated the highway traffic with a slow, measured breathing pattern. The sun dipped below the tree line, casting long gray shadows across the asphalt. I turned onto my quiet residential street and pulled into the driveway of my brick townhouse. I placed the vehicle in park and stared through the windshield at the structure. This was the exact property my husband had quietly mortgaged. He had leveraged the roof over my head to purchase a luxury shelter for a woman I had never met. I picked up my leather work tote, ensuring the printed evidence remained locked away at the commercial banking office. I only carried the identical matte black smartphones. I walked up the concrete steps and inserted my key into the brass lock. The heavy front door swung open, revealing the dimly lit foyer. Bradley was pacing the hardwood floor. He wore his tailored suit trousers and a pale blue dress shirt, but the executive polish was entirely ruined. He had discarded his silk tie. The top 3 buttons of his shirt were undone, and a thick sheen of nervous perspiration coated his forehead. His leather shoes clicked in erratic, frantic rhythm against the wood. He was a man who believed his hidden digital vault was currently walking around the city without his supervision. He stopped mid-stride the moment I stepped across the threshold. His dark eyes darted instantly to my hands. The muscles in his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the tendons straining beneath his skin. He was waiting for an accusation. He was bracing for a tearful, screaming confrontation regarding a 4-year-old biological copy and a $215,000 wire transfer. I did not offer him a confrontation. A successful audit requires the target to feel secure until the final report is published. I offered him a tired, soft smile, portraying the exact image of an exhausted corporate employee returning from a mundane shift. "Bradley," I said, keeping my tone light and apologetic, "I am so sorry. I was rushing out the door this morning and I grabbed the wrong device off the marble counter." I reached into my pocket and retrieved his matte black smartphone. I held it out toward him. "I kept it powered down in my purse all day so I would not drain your battery," I explained. "I just used my office line for my conference calls. I hope you did not miss any urgent sales emails." The physical transformation in my husband was instantaneous. The rigid terror gripping his spine evaporated. His chest heaved as his lungs pulled in a massive, uninhibited breath. The color returned to his ashen cheeks. He realized the digital locks had not been breached. He believed his shadow family and his federal bank fraud remained safely concealed in the dark. He stepped forward and snatched the phone from my palm with a speed that betrayed his lingering panic. He slipped the device into his trouser pocket and let out a hearty, hollow laugh. "You had me worried there, Rosa," he murmured. His voice was thick with manufactured relief. "I thought I left it on the commuter train. I was about to call the transit authority lost and found." He closed the remaining distance between us and pulled me into a tight embrace. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders, pressing his face into my neck. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sour underlying odor of his cold sweat. It was a suffocating physical enclosure. I stood rigid, enduring the contact. He kissed my temple, playing the role of the devoted, relieved spouse. He believed he had successfully navigated a catastrophic threat. He had no idea I had already cloned his entire criminal blueprint. He released me and promised to cook dinner to make up for his disorganized morning. As he walked toward the kitchen, my own cellular phone buzzed inside my tote bag. I pulled the device free and unlocked the screen. A new message had arrived in a group text thread. The participants included Bradley, his sister Vanessa, my mother-in-law Helen, and myself. The message originated from Helen. My mother-in-law treats social gatherings as tactical military operations. She is a woman who values outward aesthetic perfection above all genuine human connection. The text was a lengthy, detailed itinerary finalizing the floral arrangements and the catering menu for our upcoming 10-year anniversary vow renewal. Helen had insisted on hosting this extravagant celebration at her elite Maryland country club. She had spent the past 3 months demanding specific guest lists and coordinating expensive string quartets. She framed the event as a generous gift to celebrate our enduring marital success. She routinely reminded her affluent social circle that she was personally funding the reception to honor her son's profound dedication to his wife. I read the text message standing in the quiet foyer. The timing of this lavish ceremony suddenly crystallized in my mind. The pieces of the puzzle locked together, forming a chilling, comprehensive strategy. The vow renewal was not a generous gift. It was a weaponized ritual. I performed the chronological mathematics. The forged home equity line of credit was finalized 14 days ago. The stolen $215,000 was currently sitting in an escrow account managed by Vanessa's Shell Corporation. Natalie was demanding the private preschool tuition by Friday. The country club vow renewal was scheduled for the upcoming weekend. Bradley was manufacturing a timeline. Divorce proceedings are heavily influenced by established behavioral patterns and public optics. My husband was setting a theatrical stage to blindside me. He intended to stand in front of 200 corporate superiors, affluent neighbors, and extended relatives. He planned to hold my hands, look deeply into my eyes, and recite promises of eternal loyalty. He would secure dozens of wealthy character witnesses who would readily testify to his flawless devotion. He would ensure every guest observed a happy, thriving marriage. The moment the country club reception concluded, the trap would spring shut. The escrow transaction for Natalie's luxury condominium would finalize. The stolen cash would wash through Vanessa's corporate ledger, effectively vanishing from our marital estate. With his shadow family permanently housed and funded, Bradley would serve me with aggressive divorce papers. He would point to the extravagant vow renewal as irrefutable proof that he had valiantly tried to save our failing relationship. He would portray himself as the heartbroken provider, forced to leave an unstable, ungrateful partner. I would be left standing in the wreckage. I would appear to the court as a hysterical, rejected spouse. Even worse, I would be trapped beneath a fraudulent $250,000 debt tied directly to my premarital townhouse. Bradley would claim I spent the home equity funds on hidden personal expenses. He would walk away with a clean public reputation, a secret son, and a new luxury residence, while I spent the next decade battling creditors and defending my professional auditor license against federal fraud charges. The sheer sociopathic brilliance of the maneuver was staggering. He was using a celebration of our history to finance his exit strategy. He was using his mother's country club influence to construct an impenetrable alibi. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. Helen requested a final confirmation regarding the selection of the imported table linens. I did not type a warning. I did not confront my husband in the kitchen. Striking a target before the snare is fully tightened allows the prey to escape. I needed them to continue marching down their chosen path. I needed them to step onto that country club stage believing their performance was flawless. I opened the digital keyboard and selected a single red heart emoji. I pressed send. The tiny digital graphic appeared in the group thread, serving as my formal compliance. I was giving them the exact obedient daughter-in-law they required for their theater production. I locked my phone and walked toward the kitchen to watch my husband prepare our evening meal. The domestic illusion was secured. But a profound tactical problem remained unresolved. The stolen $215,000 was currently resting in a vulnerable state. If I waited until the vow renewal to spring the trap, Vanessa might initiate the final wire transfer, completing the condominium purchase for the mistress. Once the cash converted into a real estate asset held by a third party, recovering the funds would require agonizing years of civil litigation. I could not allow the stolen equity to vanish into the shadows. I needed to tag the capital. I needed an authority capable of freezing the accounts tracking the routing numbers across state lines and dismantling Vanessa's shell corporation with statutory prejudice. Tomorrow morning, I would return to my corporate office. I would bypass the local authorities entirely. The federal government possesses specialized divisions designed specifically to hunt vanishing money. I needed to prepare a very specific kind of bait. The morning sun crested over the Baltimore harbor, casting a pale golden light against the glass facades of the downtown financial district. I walked through the revolving doors of my corporate office building. My leather tote bag rested against my hip. It contained the printed evidence of my husband's financial treason. I bypassed the ground floor cafe and rode the express elevator to the auditing tier. I navigated the carpeted hallway and unlocked my corner office. I hung my charcoal coat on the designated hook. The space smelled of ozone and fresh printer toner. I sat at my glass desk and placed my hands flat on the cool surface. The silence in the room was a stark contrast to the performative domestic routine I had just escaped. Bradley had kissed my cheek 30 minutes ago, offering a bright, flawless smile before driving off to his regional sales director job. He believed his manufactured vow renewal timeline was proceeding without interference. He believed his shadow family was secure. A standard consumer discovering a forged $215,000 home equity line of credit would panic. They would immediately contact the lending institution and demand a freeze on the secondary lien. They would cancel the transaction to protect their property. A senior commercial bank auditor understands that premature cancellation is a catastrophic tactical error. If I initiated a freeze, the regional credit union would generate an automated alert. Bradley would receive a notification on his cellular device. He would realize his blueprint was compromised before the stolen equity was fully dispersed. He would empty the escrow account, transfer the funds into an untraceable offshore ledger, and hire a ruthless criminal defense attorney. He would serve me with divorce papers portraying me as the unstable spouse while keeping the cash hidden in the shadows. I refused to grant him the advantage of preparation. I needed the theft to finalize. I needed the perpetrators to feel invincible. I powered on my dual monitors, the screens illuminated, casting a crisp blue light across my face. I opened my secure corporate portal. I bypassed the standard regional compliance channels and accessed a specialized federal reporting network. As a licensed auditor, I possess direct communication protocols with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. This division does not handle simple tax errors. They hunt sprawling, coordinated financial syndicates. I pulled the black legal binder from my desk drawer. I opened the metal rings and extracted the printed documentation regarding Summit Logistics. Vanessa had registered the shell corporation 3 weeks ago, intending to use the entity to wash the stolen equity. She planned to process the down payment for the luxury condominium and the private preschool tuition through this fake fitness studio ledger. She assumed forming a limited liability company provided an impenetrable digital shield. I typed the routing numbers into the federal reporting interface. I uploaded the forged deed, the counterfeit notary stamp, and the state registry filings for Vanessa's company. I drafted a concise empirical narrative outlining the precise mechanics of the wire fraud. I did not request a freeze on the funds. I formally surrendered the corporate details and requested the destination account be flagged as a designated honeypot. In the realm of financial crime, a honeypot is a lethal mechanism. The federal agents do not stop the flow of money. They observe it. They attach digital tracking tags to the specific ledger. The account remains open and fully operational, allowing the targets to conduct their business without suspicion. But every single transaction is monitored, copied, and archived by government forensic teams. I watched the progress bar inch across my screen as the encrypted files transferred to the federal database. Bradley and his sister believed they were executing a brilliant laundering strategy. They intended to move the $215,000 across state lines, purchasing designer furniture, paying educational fees, and securing real estate for a woman named Natalie. They thought they were building an empire for a secret child. In reality, They were financing their own federal indictments. Every time Vanessa swiped a debit card tied to that specific account, the transaction would generate a fresh count of wire fraud. Every time Bradley authorized a transfer for the condo escrow, he was compounding his own prison sentence. The federal authorities would trace the origin of the capital back to the forged home equity loan. They would document the cross-state purchases. The trap would weave an inescapable web of statutory violations around the entire family. The federal interface refreshed. A green verification banner populated at the top of the monitor. The system generated a 12-digit alphanumeric confirmation code indicating the honeypot protocol was officially armed. The Internal Revenue Service had accepted the file. The tracking tags were active. The bait was set, and the predators were already feeding. I recorded the confirmation sequence in my secure digital vault. I closed the web browser. I shut the black legal binder and returned it to the bottom drawer, turning the key to lock the compartment. The structural architecture of their ruin was fully functional. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. I reached for my travel mug and took a slow, deliberate sip of black coffee. The dark liquid was bitter and hot. It grounded me in the present moment. I thought about Vanessa. My sister-in-law had spent her entire adult life navigating the world with a sense of unearned entitlement. She bounced from one failed vanity project to another, always relying on her brother to clear the debris. Bradley subsidized her failures because rescuing her validated his own inflated ego. They shared a parasitic symbiosis. He provided the capital, and she provided the blind loyalty required to hide his transgressions. She was facilitating his shadow family because it guaranteed her a steady stream of stolen equity to fund her boutique fitness studio. They viewed themselves as untouchable. They operated under the delusion that their shared surname granted them immunity from consequence. The reality of their situation was far more severe than a simple familial dispute. When individuals manipulate banking networks to conceal illicit gains, the justice system responds with unyielding force. The federal agents currently monitoring the Summit Logistics ledger did not care about our impending vow renewal. They did not care about the country club optics or the performative suburban lifestyle my husband curated so carefully. They cared exclusively about the movement of untaxed, fraudulent capital. Every dollar spent on Pilates reformers for Vanessa's fake studio or luxury fixtures for Natalie's apartment added another page to the prosecution brief. I set the coffee mug down on the glass desk. I felt a deep, profound peace settling over my nervous system. It was the cold, structural comfort of a professional who knows the mathematics of the situation are entirely in her favor. The emotional weight of the betrayal was gone, replaced by the sterile precision of an ongoing audit. I did not need to confront my husband. I did not need to scream at my sister-in-law. The federal government was currently performing that task on my behalf, tracking every cent they squandered. But securing the digital perimeter was only one component of the operation. The financial trap was armed, but the social performance required my continued participation. My mother-in-law, Helen, was hosting her mandatory Sunday dinner this weekend at her pristine suburban estate. Helen demanded regular attendance to project her flawless matriarchal image. I needed to sit at her dining table. I needed to break bread with the people who were actively orchestrating my ruin. I needed to observe them in their natural habitat while the federal agents watched their bank accounts. I picked up my pen and reviewed my afternoon schedule. The next phase required me to wear my invisible armor and survive a meal built entirely on lies. The Maryland suburbs south of Baltimore project an aura of effortless affluence. I parked my sedan along the curved driveway of my mother-in-law's estate. The landscaping was immaculate, featuring geometric hedges and a pristine brick facade. Helen demanded aesthetic perfection from her environment because she lacked any genuine substance beneath her own surface. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet cabin of my vehicle for a full minute. I was preparing to walk into a theater where every actor was actively plotting my financial execution. I stepped out into the crisp Sunday afternoon air, wearing a tailored beige sweater and a pleasant, neutral expression. It was my invisible armor. I walked through the heavy front doors. The house smelled of synthetic pine and expensive room diffusers. I navigated the hardwood hallway toward the kitchen. Helen stood at the sprawling quartz island. She wore a pristine white blouse and delicate pearl earrings. She was busy dismantling a cardboard box from a discount bulk grocery retailer. Inside the carton rested a large frozen lasagna wrapped in clear plastic. I watched my husband's mother carefully peel away the packaging. She used a metal spatula to slide the frozen block of pasta and artificial cheese into an ornate crystal serving dish. The heavy glass caught the afternoon sunlight, refracting prisms across the pristine countertops. She smoothed the top layer of frozen tomato sauce with the back of a silver spoon, hiding the rigid rectangular corners of the generic meal. That crystal dish was the defining physical artifact of her maternal identity. Helen possessed zero interest in the grueling, unseen labor required to nurture a family. She preferred to purchase something cheap and effortless, transfer it into a vessel of undeniable value, and accept the glowing compliments of her guests. She wanted the applause without the expenditure of energy. I stood in the doorway observing the deception. She turned around and offered a bright synthetic smile. She told me to go wait in the dining room while the oven finished heating her homemade recipe. I offered a polite nod and walked away. Bradley and his sister Vanessa were sitting in the formal dining room. My husband held a glass of dark red wine. The frantic, sweating panic he exhibited on Thursday evening was entirely gone. He lounged against the high back of his upholstered chair, projecting the relaxed, buoyant aura of a victorious executive. He believed his preemptive gaslighting had successfully neutralized my suspicions. He thought his shadow family was secure, and his fraudulent home equity line of credit remained a secret. Vanessa sat across from him, scrolling through her cellular device. She wore designer athletic apparel and a smug, self-satisfied expression. Helen carried the steaming crystal dish into the room and placed it in the center of the table. We took our assigned seats. My mother-in-law poured the wine and raised her glass to initiate the weekly ritual. She looked directly at Bradley, her eyes shining with profound, unearned pride. She announced a toast to her son, praising his relentless dedication to his career and his household. She spoke about the heavy burdens he carried and the sacrifices he made to ensure his family remained comfortable. Bradley smiled humbly. He took a slow sip of his wine, absorbing the flattery like a dry sponge. He soaked up the adoration of the woman who enabled his worst instincts. He looked like a devoted provider. He did not look like a man who forged his wife's signature to buy a luxury condominium for his mistress. The conversation shifted seamlessly from the golden son to the golden daughter. Vanessa set her phone face down on the table and leaned forward. She announced that she had officially secured the commercial lease for her new boutique fitness studio. She bragged about the prime downtown location, the expensive architectural rendering for the interior, and the elite clientele she planned to attract. She spoke with the breathless arrogance of a self-made entrepreneur. I picked up my silver knife and fork. I cut a square of the lasagna with measured, deliberate precision. The layers of synthetic cheese and processed meat yielded easily under the blade. I lifted the food to my mouth and chewed slowly. The meal tasted like salt and preservatives. I watched Vanessa wave her hands as she described the imported yoga mats she planned to purchase. I observed the lie unfolding in real time. My sister-in-law was not a brilliant business owner. She was the registered agent of a shell corporation. Summit Logistics was the entity receiving the stolen $215,000. She was currently standing on the edge of a sheer financial cliff, wearing designer clothes purchased with my stolen equity. She believed she had successfully laundered the capital required to build her fitness empire. She did not know I had spent my Friday morning configuring a federal honeypot. The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division was actively monitoring the exact routing numbers she used to secure that commercial lease. Every dollar she transmitted to a landlord or a fitness equipment vendor generated a fresh digital tracking tag. She was not building a business. She was meticulously financing her own federal indictment. Helen turned her attention toward me. The warm maternal pride vanished from her features, replaced by a thin layer of practiced condescension. She looked at my sensible sweater, and offered a sympathetic, pitying sigh. She told me I looked exhausted. She suggested that auditing commercial bank records was too stressful for a young woman. She urged me to step back from my grueling corporate schedule. She said Bradley earned more than enough to support us, and that a wife should focus her energy on maintaining a peaceful home rather than chasing a hollow career. The irony of her statement was structural. Bradley did not earn enough to support his own illusions. He relied on the quiet, grueling labor of my career to fund his secret child and his impending divorce strategy. They wanted me to abandon the very profession that allowed me to uncover their felonies. They wanted the cash machine to remain plugged in, but they wanted the operator to close her eyes. I swallowed the cheap pasta. I did not argue with her assessment. I did not defend my choices or my income. Defending yourself to a parasite only validates their authority to question you. I offered a tight, closed-mouth smile. I told her I appreciated her concern and that I would certainly consider adjusting my priorities in the near future. Bradley beamed. He reached across the table and patted my hand, offering a patronizing nod of approval. He thought I was yielding to the pressure. He thought the obedient spouse was falling back into her designated role. I let him keep his hand resting over mine. I let them gorge themselves on their synthetic meal and their unearned pride. The performance was flawless. The dinner concluded an hour later. I helped clear the plates, leaving the empty crystal dish on the counter. I retrieved my coat and walked out to my sedan. The sun was setting, casting a bruised purple hue across the Maryland sky. I started the engine and drove away from the pristine suburban estate. The federal trap was armed and the social illusions were secured, but the forensic mathematics of my survival required one final adjustment. The honeypot would eventually put Bradley and Vanessa in a federal penitentiary, but the fraudulent home equity line of credit remained anchored to my personal townhouse. If the federal authorities froze my husband's assets during the investigation, the secondary mortgage would default. The bank would initiate foreclosure proceedings against my property before the criminal trial ever began. I needed an impenetrable structural shield. I needed to separate my identity from the physical dirt they had attempted to leverage. I could not rely on standard banking procedures to protect my net worth. I needed a specialized corporate maneuver designed to fortify assets against hostile legal extraction. I turned my vehicle toward the city. Tomorrow morning, I would schedule a discreet consultation with an attorney who viewed emotion as a weakness and contractual boundaries as absolute law. The Maryland morning sky presented a flat, slate-gray canopy as I navigated the interstate toward downtown Baltimore. The performative Sunday dinner at my mother-in-law's estate had concluded, leaving behind the lingering scent of synthetic room diffusers and unearned arrogance. Helen and Vanessa believed their illusions remained secure. They thought the stolen equity funding the boutique fitness studio lease was safely laundered, oblivious to the federal tracking tags, silently archiving every digital transaction. But tracking stolen capital only addresses the offensive front of a financial war. A seasoned auditor knows that a successful campaign requires impenetrable structural defense. If the regional credit union discovered the forged signatures on the home equity line of credit, they would initiate foreclosure proceedings against my premarital townhouse to recoup their losses. The lending institution would not pause to consider my innocence. They would simply seize the collateral. Bradley had tethered my personal sanctuary to a fraudulent debt. I needed to sever that tether. I needed to separate my identity from the physical dirt he attempted to leverage. The solution required legal mechanisms far beyond the scope of a standard family dispute. I bypassed the standard consumer legal clinics and parked my sedan in the subterranean garage of a premium commercial high-rise. I rode the elevator to the 50th floor, stepping into the reception area of a firm specializing exclusively in high-net-worth asset fortification. The lobby featured polished concrete floors, stark minimalist furniture, and frosted glass partitions. It projected an aura of clinical, unyielding legal authority. I was there to meet Evelyn. Evelyn is a senior partner who views emotion as a severe liability and contractual boundaries as immutable laws. She built her reputation dismantling hostile corporate takeovers and shielding assets from predatory litigants. A receptionist wearing a tailored suit guided me down a quiet corridor and opened the door to a glass-walled conference room. Evelyn sat at the head of a long slate table. She wore a pristine charcoal blazer, her posture rigid, her focus directed at a digital tablet. She did not offer a warm, comforting smile when I entered. She did not ask how I was feeling. She simply gestured toward the empty leather chair opposite her. We did not exchange pleasantries about the autumn weather or the weekend. I unzipped my work tote and retrieved the pristine black legal binder. I placed the binder on the slate surface and pushed it across the table. Evelyn opened the metal rings and reviewed the printed documentation. She examined the forged loan origination paperwork, her eyes scanning the rightward slant of my fabricated signature. She inspected the disciplinary record of the suspended notary public. She traced the escrow wire logs directing the stolen $215,000 into Vanessa's Shell Corporation. Evelyn did not express moral outrage. She processed the betrayal as a mathematical equation requiring immediate recalibration. Your husband utilized a counterfeit seal to mortgage your primary residence, Evelyn stated, her voice carrying a dry, measured cadence. He funneled the cash to an entity controlled by his sister. The financial institution holds a secondary lien on your property. I nodded, keeping my hands folded in my lap. I need the asset insulated, I replied. If the bank initiates a default sequence, or if the federal authorities freeze his accounts during the impending investigation, I refuse to let my townhouse become collateral damage in the fallout. I built that equity before I ever met him. He does not get to gamble with my foundation. Evelyn closed the binder. She tapped a silver pen against the table, calculating the optimal statutory maneuver. A standard title transfer will not suffice, she explained. We need to construct an architectural void. We need an irrevocable blind trust. In the realm of elite wealth management, an irrevocable trust acts as the ultimate defensive fortress. It is a distinct legal entity designed to separate individual ownership from the actual assets. Once a piece of real estate or a financial portfolio transfers into this specific structure, the original owner surrenders their direct claim. The trust becomes the supreme authority, managed by an independent fiduciary. The assets are shielded from probate courts, predatory creditors, and grasping spouses. They cannot be seized, altered, or leveraged without explicit statutory consent from the designated trustee. We will draft the charter this morning, Evelyn instructed, pulling a fresh legal pad from her drawer. We will move the Maryland townhouse into the trust. I also strongly advise transferring your corporate stock portfolio and your primary high-yield savings accounts. We need to leave your personal ledger entirely blank. We need to make you a ghost on paper. I agreed to the terms without hesitation. The process required meticulous administrative coordination. I spent the remainder of the week executing the complex transfers. I signed the thick stacks of property deeds, authorized the portfolio migrations, and established the independent fiduciary oversight. I sat in a conference room answering verification questions and providing fingerprint authentications. By Friday afternoon, the transition finalized. The county clerk recorded the new property deed, wiping the name Rosa James from the public registry. I walked out of the law firm holding the certified trust documentation safely inside my briefcase. On paper, I was destitute. I owned 0 real estate. I possessed 0 corporate equity. I was merely a salaried employee existing without tangible net worth. If a creditor or a divorce attorney searched my financial profile, they would find empty pockets. In reality, I was an impenetrable fortress. The assets I had spent my 20s accumulating were locked behind a steel door, insulated against the impending blast radius. The creation of the trust did not merely protect my sanctuary. It fundamentally altered the geometry of my husband's crime. This introduced the 7th layer of the conflict. When Bradley forged my signature 14 days ago, he committed standard identity theft to defraud a commercial lender. He thought he was outsmarting his wife. But the legal landscape had shifted beneath his feet while he was busy bragging at Sunday dinner. The forged home equity line of credit was no longer simply attempting to leverage a spouse's property. He had, unknowingly, submitted fraudulent documents against a federally protected asset managed by an independent fiduciary. He was attempting to extract capital from a highly regulated corporate entity. The severity of the offense escalated exponentially. The jurisdiction shifted from state civil courts to severe federal bank fraud. This specific violation carries mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines under federal statutes. My husband believed he had orchestrated a clever suburban scheme to finance a luxury condo for his mistress. He failed to realize he had just locked himself inside a federal penitentiary. I navigated the downtown traffic feeling the distinct structural peace of a professional who holds the winning hand. The defensive perimeter was secure. The federal honeypot was actively tracking Vanessa's spending. The trust was shielding my wealth. I possessed the bank logs and the forged signatures, but paper trails, while legally devastating, often lack the visceral impact of a verbal confession. Federal prosecutors appreciate documented numbers, but they respond powerfully to recorded arrogance. I knew Bradley was funneling the stolen equity to purchase a luxury condominium for Natalie, the shadow woman demanding private preschool tuition for his secret son. I knew where the money was going, but I needed the recipient to admit her complicity on the record. I needed proof that she understood the illicit origin of the funds. I stopped at a red light and stared at the digital display on my dashboard. I needed to locate the mistress. I needed to sit across from her, offer an audience, and let her arrogant pride provide the final piece of evidence required to bury them all. A paper trail provides the structural foundation for a federal indictment, but an audio confession supplies the unbreakable lock. To secure a criminal conviction against a secondary conspirator, prosecutors require undeniable evidence of explicit knowledge. I needed to prove the mistress understood the illicit origin of the funds purchasing her luxury shelter. I opened the encrypted photo album I had extracted from Bradley's digital vault. A forensic auditor does not merely observe the smiling faces in a photograph. We analyze the metadata. Every digital image carries hidden, exchangeable image file format data, detailing the exact geographic coordinates and chronological timestamps of its creation. I ran the image files through a secure extraction program. A distinct spatial pattern emerged on my monitor. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, after dropping the 4-year-old biological copy at his private preschool, the mistress frequented a highly specific location. The coordinates pointed to an upscale organic coffee shop situated in the affluent center of Bethesda, Maryland. Bethesda operates as a sanctuary of privileged leisure. I drove my sedan toward the designated quadrant on Tuesday morning, parking a block away from the cafe. The air carried the crisp chill of late autumn. I adjusted the collar of my tailored camel hair coat. I carried a structured leather handbag. I did not dress like a betrayed spouse seeking chaotic revenge. I projected the polished aesthetic of an independent angel investor evaluating lucrative ventures. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the coffee shop. The interior smelled of roasted espresso eucalyptus and expensive botanical serums. The clientele consisted of individuals who treated Tuesday mornings as an extension of the weekend. I spotted her immediately. Natalie sat at a corner table near the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was bathed in natural sunlight, scrolling lazily through her smartphone. She wore a pristine set of designer athleisure wear. The fabric was a distinct sage green, featuring the subtle logo of a boutique brand that charged $300 for a single pair of leggings. She had purchased that outfit using the stolen equity from my premarital townhouse. She was lounging in subsidized luxury, financed by my grueling 60-hour work weeks. I approached the counter and ordered a black espresso. I waited for the barista to pull the shot, observing my target through the reflection in the pastry case glass. I carried my ceramic cup to the table directly adjacent to hers. I sat down and placed my leather handbag on the polished wood. I retrieved my cellular phone, activated the voice recording application, and set the device face down near the edge of the table. The internal microphone pointed precisely toward her chair. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. I turned my head and offered a polite, professional smile. I complimented the specific designer cut of her athletic jacket. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. People who subsist on unearned wealth harbor a desperate, unending need for external validation. Natalie lowered her phone, her eyes illuminating at the recognition of her expensive attire. Within 3 minutes, she had eagerly shifted to my table. She introduced herself, tossing her long blonde hair over her shoulder. I introduced myself, using my middle name, presenting the fabricated persona of a venture capitalist specializing in boutique lifestyle brands. I mentioned I was currently evaluating the Bethesda market for potential entrepreneurial talent. Natalie took the bait with a breathless, staggering enthusiasm. She leaned across the small table, her iced matcha latte sweating condensation onto the wood. She began pitching vague concepts for a holistic wellness and activewear brand, painting herself as an undiscovered visionary seeking the right opportunity. I listened with manufactured interest, nodding at the appropriate intervals. I steered the conversation toward the rigid mechanics of business development. I noted that launching a lifestyle brand requires significant initial capital and a stable operational headquarters. I asked if she possessed the foundational funding to secure a commercial lease or a primary residence to run the logistics. Her response was a masterpiece of oblivious self-incrimination. Natalie let out a soft, dismissive laugh. She stirred her green beverage with a bamboo straw, projecting an aura of smug superiority. She told me capital was the least of her concerns. She leaned closer, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. She bragged about her wealthy partner, describing him as a brilliant regional director who managed high-level sales and possessed limitless resources. She claimed they were currently finalizing the escrow on a luxury condominium that would serve as both their primary residence and her new brand headquarters. I raised a single brow, feigning mild skepticism, to push her further. I asked if tying up personal liquid assets in real estate might strain her partner's operational budget. The trap snapped shut. Natalie shook her head, a patronizing grin spreading across her lips. She stated her partner was far too clever to utilize his own liquidity. She looked me directly in the eyes and explained the specific origin of the condominium funds. She boasted that her boyfriend was currently extracting nearly $250,000 in equity from a townhouse owned by his clueless workaholic wife. She laughed, detailing how the wife spent her entire life buried in commercial banking spreadsheets, entirely oblivious to the fact that her name was being used on the loan documents. She referred to the legal spouse as a convenient automated teller machine. I let the digital recorder capture every single syllable of her confession. She had just admitted to possessing advanced, explicit knowledge of federal bank fraud. She knew the home equity line of credit was secured through active forgery. She knew the capital was stolen from a legal spouse. By willingly accepting a luxury condominium purchased with those specific illicit funds, she transitioned from a hidden mistress to a knowing accessory in a sprawling financial felony. The federal prosecutors would not just seize her real estate, they would add her name to the indictment roster right below Bradley and Vanessa. I maintained my composed professional expression. I did not flinch or react to the insulting characterization of my own life. I told her the strategy sounded incredibly lucrative and wished her the best of luck with the condominium closing on Friday. I promised to keep her contact information on file for future investment rounds. I stood up, retrieved my cellular phone, and slipped it securely into my pocket. The digital audio file was saved, date-stamped, and ready to be uploaded to my encrypted corporate server. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her to sip her matcha latte, entirely unaware that she had just narrated her own prison sentence. The crisp Maryland air felt refreshing against my skin as I walked back to my sedan. The forensic snare was now hermetically sealed. I possessed the forged deeds, the suspended notary logs, the tracking numbers from the federal honeypot, and the audio confession implicating the recipient of the stolen equity. The offensive strategy was flawless. But as I merged onto the highway heading back to my office, my intuition signaled a distinct shift. Bradley had initiated this timeline. If the escrow for the condominium was scheduled to close by the weekend, he would need to ensure the final paperwork was authorized without triggering any secondary alerts from the regional credit union. He would need to guarantee my continued blindness. A predator preparing for the final strike always checks the restraints on the prey. I knew my husband was preparing a final, desperate maneuver to lock me into the debt permanently before our upcoming vow renewal. The psychological performance was far from over. The drive back to Baltimore from the upscale Bethesda coffee shop provided a necessary corridor of silence. I navigated the highway traffic with my cellular phone resting securely in the center console. The digital audio file containing Natalie bragging about her impending luxury condominium and my supposed financial ignorance was saved, encoded, and uploaded to my encrypted cloud server. The offensive perimeter of my strategy was hermetically sealed. I possessed the bank routing numbers, the forged deed, the suspended notary logs, the federal tracking tags, and the audio confession. Every single vector of my husband's betrayal was documented with clinical precision. I steered my sedan into my quiet residential neighborhood. The afternoon sun cast long, angular shadows across the brick facades of the townhouses. As I approached my driveway, a distinct anomaly disrupted the predictable rhythm of the day. Bradley's vehicle was parked near the garage door. He worked as a regional sales director, a position that traditionally kept him in the field or at his corporate office until 6 in the evening. It was barely 3 o'clock. A deviation in a predator's routine is never a random occurrence. It indicates a sudden threat assessment. I turned off the ignition and sat in the quiet cabin of my car. Bradley had sensed a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure. Liars possess a highly calibrated radar for detection. My calm demeanor over the past few days, my lack of domestic friction, my quiet compliance, it all registered as unnatural. He knew the escrow on the luxury condominium was scheduled to finalize soon. He needed to ensure his stage set remained undisturbed until the ink on that real estate transaction dried. He was waiting inside to execute a preemptive strike. I stepped out of the vehicle and walked up the concrete path. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The foyer felt stagnant. Before I could even remove my tailored charcoal coat, Bradley stepped out of the kitchen. He wore a crisp, white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, projecting a casual, relaxed aesthetic. But his physical tells betrayed the severe tension gripping his nervous system. A thin layer of perspiration coated his upper lip. His breathing was shallow. He held his hands behind his back, hiding something from my immediate line of sight. "Rosa," he said, his tone infused with a bright, synthetic cheerfulness. "You are home early. I was hoping to surprise you." He brought his hands forward, revealing his offering. He held a bouquet of grocery store carnations. The flowers were a pale, sickly pink, wrapped tightly in crinkling, clear cellophane. A generic barcode sticker was still affixed to the plastic wrapping. The edges of the petals were already turning a bruised shade of brown. The stagnant water trapped at the bottom of the plastic smelled faint and sour. This was his designated peace offering. He had forged my signature to extract $215,000 in equity from my premarital property. He was routing that stolen capital through his sister's shell corporation to purchase a permanent shelter for his mistress and his secret 4-year-old son. To compensate for this staggering systemic treason, he stopped at a discount market and spent $6 on dyeing carnations. The bouquet was a physical motif, representing the exact value he placed upon my intelligence. "I just wanted to show you how much I appreciate you," he murmured, stepping closer and extending the flowers. "I know things have been stressful lately with my travel schedule. I want to make sure we are focused on us, especially with the vow renewal coming up this weekend." I accepted the bouquet. The plastic crinkled sharply in the quiet foyer. The gesture was hollow, an obligatory prop utilized to lower my defenses before he deployed the actual snare. I offered a tight, polite smile. "That is very thoughtful, Bradley," I replied, keeping my voice even and untroubled. "I will put these in water." I walked past him into the kitchen. I laid the carnations on the granite counter near the sink. As I turned around, I noticed the true purpose of his early arrival. Resting on the center of the kitchen island was a thick stack of printed documents. A sleek silver ballpoint pen lay positioned precisely next to the paper. Bradley followed me into the room. He leaned against the counter, crowding my physical space. He crossed his arms, attempting to look nonchalant, but his right foot tapped a frantic, erratic rhythm against the hardwood floor. "While you were getting settled, my accountant actually sent over a few routine disclosures," he said, waving a hand dismissively toward the stack. "It is just standard tax preparation paperwork for our joint filings. The deadline shifted, and he needs these updated by the end of the business day. I already signed my portions." I looked at the printed pages. I am a senior commercial bank auditor. I spend 50 hours a week analyzing complex corporate ledgers and dissecting federal tax disclosures. I recognized the formatting of the documents immediately. The top pages were indeed standard federal filing forms, providing the perfect, boring camouflage for a hidden trap. I stepped up to the island and pulled the stack toward me. I flipped through the first 3 pages, offering a practiced sigh of administrative exhaustion. "Just routine filings," I echoed, maintaining my unbothered facade. I reached the 7th page. The dense legal jargon shifted from standard tax verbiage into a highly specific contractual language. The header was discreet, but the clauses were lethal. It was a retroactive ratification document. In the realm of commercial lending, a ratification addendum is an exceptionally dangerous tool. If a borrower discovers a fraudulent lien attached to their property, they hold the authority to contest the debt. However, if the victim affixes their signature to a ratification agreement, they legally adopt the fraudulent loan as their own authorized action. The document buried in my kitchen explicitly stated that the undersigned acknowledges and accepts the terms of the recent home equity line of credit. Bradley had realized his vulnerability. He knew the regional credit union would eventually mail the servicing statements to our address. He panicked. He rushed home with cheap flowers to trick me into retroactively adopting his theft before I ever noticed the missing equity. If I signed that specific page, the state felony would be erased. The federal wire fraud would evaporate. The $215,000 debt would become my permanent binding obligation, and his immunity would be secured. "Just initial the sticky notes and sign the bottom line," he urged, taking a half step closer. His shoulder brushed against mine. He was hovering, projecting a suffocating urgency to prevent me from reading the fine print. "I have to scan these and email them back to the firm before 5. If I possessed a volatile temperament, I would have picked up the stack of papers and thrown them at his chest. I would have informed him that I possessed the audio confession from his mistress and the federal honeypot confirmation codes. I would have demanded he pack his belongings and vacate my property. But confronting a predator prematurely only provides them with the opportunity to invent a new lie. It allows them to contact their accomplices and destroy secondary evidence. I did not raise my voice. I did not step away from his hovering presence. I picked up the silver ballpoint pen. Signing a fraudulent contract usually traps the victim, but my professional training provided a secondary option. 4 years ago, my commercial bank mandated an intensive security seminar for all senior auditors. A former federal forensic handwriting expert conducted the training. He taught us how to identify captive clients, individuals forced to sign binding documents under extreme duress. He instructed us on the mechanics of the duress signature. When you are coerced into signing a document, you do not write your normal name. You manipulate the geometric structure of the ink strokes. You alter the foundational rhythm of your penmanship to send a documented distress signal. I pressed the tip of the silver pen against the signature line on the 7th page. My standard handwriting is fluid and interconnected. I deliberately altered the angle of my initial capital letters, flattening the curves. I specifically disconnected my first name from my surname, leaving a stark, visible gap between the words. I changed the downward slant of my vowels, pulling them in the opposite direction of my natural muscle memory. To the untrained eye of a desperate regional sales director, the ink spelled out Rosa James. It looked perfectly normal. To a certified forensic document examiner, it was a glaring, undeniable structural anomaly. It was legally provable evidence of forgery and coercion. It demonstrated that I did not willingly authorize the contract. I flipped to the final page and executed the same manipulated signature. I set the pen down. The metal clicked softly against the quartz counter. "All done," I said, sliding the stack back toward him. The physical transformation in my husband was instantaneous. Bradley exhaled a long, shuddering breath. The frantic tapping of his foot ceased. The rigid tension in his shoulders dissolved, leaving him looking pliant and victorious. He snatched the documents from the counter, aligning the edges with greedy, hasty movements. He believed he had just insulated himself from a federal prison sentence. He thought his stage set was permanently secured. "Thank you, Rosa," he murmured. His voice was thick with manufactured relief. "You are a lifesaver. I will go scan these right now." He leaned in and kissed my cheek. His lips felt cold. The scent of his nervous sweat lingered in the air between us. He turned around and walked swiftly down the hallway toward his home office, clutching the paperwork against his chest. He was entirely unaware that he had just accepted the physical evidence of his own coercion. He had handed me the final weapon required to ensure his destruction. I stood alone in the kitchen. I looked at the wilting grocery store carnations resting near the sink. The preemptive gaslighting attempt had failed. His fabricated timeline was proceeding exactly as he desired. The elaborate vow renewal hosted by my mother-in-law was scheduled to take place in merely 48 hours. They expected me to stand in a country club ballroom and play the role of the devoted, oblivious wife. They wanted an audience for their grand illusion. I needed to gather the forged deeds, the tracking numbers, and the audio transcripts. I needed to assemble the payload. The time for silent investigation had reached its conclusion. I walked toward the entryway to retrieve a heavy, gold-embossed gift box I had purchased earlier that week. It was time to build the Trojan horse. The Thursday night air inside my Maryland townhouse was heavy and stagnant. 2 days remained until the highly anticipated 10th anniversary vow renewal. Upstairs, my husband slept in our primary bedroom. His breathing followed a deep, rhythmic cadence, signaling a man unburdened by anxiety. Bradley believed his preemptive strike had succeeded. He thought the cheap grocery store carnations and his hovering presence had intimidated me into signing a routine tax disclosure. He went to sleep, convinced he had legally erased his state felony and secured his immunity. He did not realize his rest was funded by a ticking clock. I sat alone downstairs at the mahogany dining table. The only illumination in the room came from a single overhead pendant light, casting a sharp, focused beam across the polished wood. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the sprawling financial conspiracy buzzing just beneath the surface of our marriage. I did not feel the sting of heartbreak. Heartbreak is an emotional luxury reserved for victims who do not possess the statutory evidence required to incinerate their predators. I am a senior commercial bank auditor. I spend my days tracing phantom liabilities and dissecting corporate deception. I evaluate ledgers. Tonight, I was finalizing the ultimate audit report of my own life. I reached down to the floor and unzipped the main compartment of my leather work tote. I bypassed my laptop and extracted a specific item I had purchased earlier that afternoon from a high-end boutique in downtown Baltimore. It was an elegant, heavy rectangular gift box. The exterior was constructed of premium cardstock, featuring an intricate gold-embossed geometric pattern. It projected an aura of severe, undeniable wealth. A 10th wedding anniversary traditionally demands a gift of tin or aluminum, but modern suburban conventions suggest luxury timepieces or diamond jewelry. Bradley expected me to present him with a vintage mechanical watch. He wanted a tangible token of my enduring devotion to wear on his wrist while he shook hands with his corporate superiors at his mother's country club. I placed the empty gold vessel on the dining table. I did not purchase a watch. I was preparing a payload that would strip the time directly from his future. I opened the bottom drawer of my briefcase and pulled out the pristine black legal binder. The metal rings clicked open with a sharp, definitive sound. I began the ceremonial assembly of his ruin. The first document I extracted was the confirmation printout from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The federal honeypot protocol was actively engaging its target. I traced the printed routing numbers with my index finger. My sister-in-law, Vanessa, genuinely believed her boutique fitness studio was a stroke of entrepreneurial brilliance. She was currently standing inside a leased commercial space, purchasing imported yoga mats and signing vendor contracts using my stolen equity. She failed to understand that every single time she swiped her debit card, the transaction generated a distinct digital tracking tag. The federal agents were archiving her expenditures, building an inescapable wire fraud case. I laid the IRS confirmation flat against the bottom of the gold box. I retrieved the next layer of evidence from the binder. I pulled the digitized access logs detailing the fraudulent home equity line of credit. The paperwork proved my husband utilized my Social Security number to extract $215,000 from my premarital property. I placed the forged deed right on top of the federal tracking codes. Beside it, I laid the forensic handwriting analysis. This certified report detailed the specific structural anomalies of the duress signature I had utilized when Bradley cornered me in the kitchen. The document highlighted the altered slant of the vowels and the stark, disconnected surname. It provided undeniable, legally provable evidence of active coercion. He assumed he had tricked me into ratifying his theft. He had actually handed me the statutory proof of his own predatory intimidation. The third addition to the payload was a typed transcript. I had spent my lunch hour wearing noise-canceling headphones, listening to the audio recording I captured at the upscale Bethesda coffee shop. I typed every single syllable Natalie spoke. The printed text recounted her breathtaking arrogance. It documented her explicit knowledge of the forged loan and her gleeful anticipation of moving into a luxury shelter funded by my grueling 60-hour work weeks. The mistress, draped in designer athletic wear, had willingly confessed to being an accessory to federal bank fraud. Her spoken words looked stark and unforgiving, translated into standard black ink. I smoothed the pages and placed the transcript over the forgery logs. The foundation of the trap was secure, but I needed to deliver the closing summary. I reached into the final pocket of my briefcase and extracted 2 documents drafted by my corporate attorney, Evelyn. The first was a formal petition for dissolution of marriage. I was not requesting mediation, a division of shared property, or a drawn-out civil negotiation. The irrevocable blind trust I established shielded my entire net worth. I was simply severing the legal tether between my identity and his liability. The second document was a specialized 24-hour notice of seizure and eviction. The luxury condominium Natalie currently occupied was purchased using stolen capital tied directly to my federally protected trust. Therefore, the real estate asset was subject to immediate recovery protocols by the independent fiduciary. Natalie believed she was unpacking boxes and arranging furniture in her permanent sanctuary. She possessed less than a day before an asset recovery team arrived to change the brass locks on her front door. I placed the divorce filing and the eviction notice at the very top of the stack. The paper payload fit flawlessly inside the heavy cardstock walls. It was an aesthetic masterpiece containing unmitigated systemic destruction. I placed the gold-embossed lid over the box. The fit was snug, pushing a faint breath of air out of the seams. I retrieved a spool of dark navy satin ribbon from my tote. I wrapped the ribbon around the structure, crossing the smooth fabric underneath and bringing the ends to the top. I tied a precise, symmetrical bow. I pulled the loops taut, ensuring the presentation was immaculate. My in-laws worshipped visual aesthetics. They valued the outward projection of success above all underlying truth. Helen insisted on hosting this lavish country club celebration specifically to project a flawless matriarchal image to her affluent peers. Bradley utilized the upcoming event to construct an impenetrable alibi for his planned betrayal. They desired a beautiful, polished package to display to their social circle. I was giving them exactly what they requested. I picked up the heavy gold box. The weight of the paper inside felt substantial and grounding. I walked away from the dining table, moving silently down the short hallway toward the front entryway. I placed the anniversary offering on the console table directly next to my car keys and my leather purse. It sat there, catching the faint ambient illumination from the streetlights filtering through the front window glass. The Trojan horse was armed. It was waiting for the Saturday evening reception. I walked back to the dining room and flipped the wall switch. The overhead pendant light turned off, plunging the townhouse into deep, quiet shadow. I stood in the dark and monitored my own physiology. My breathing was even. My pulse maintained a slow, steady rhythm. The mathematics of their ruin were fully calculated. The variables were locked into their designated columns. I did not feel fear regarding the impending confrontation. I felt the cold, structural peace of an auditor who has successfully balanced the ledger. The loud, performative relatives were about to step onto a stage they did not own, and I was prepared to hand them the final bill. The Maryland evening carried a crisp autumn chill as I surrendered the keys of my sedan to the country club valet. The venue was an imposing structure of imported stone and sprawling, manicured golf greens. It was the exact environment my mother-in-law required to validate her existence. Helen had selected this exclusive location to host our 10th anniversary vow renewal because she did not view the event as a celebration of a marriage. She viewed it as a high-yield social investment. I walked up the wide concrete steps and handed my coat to the attendant in the foyer. Tucked securely under my left arm was the heavy gold-embossed gift box. It rested against my side, containing a dense package of certified paper designed to end an era. The ballroom doors stood open, spilling warm amber light and the melodic hum of a live string quartet into the lobby. I stepped across the threshold. The room was a staggering spectacle of performative wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast refracted prisms across tables draped in heavy white linen. Waiters in pristine vests circulated through the crowd holding silver trays of champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. I scanned the room and located my husband. Bradley was standing near the center of the ballroom holding a glass of bourbon. He wore a sharp, tailored tuxedo that projected the effortless authority of a rising corporate star. He was engaged in a deep, animated conversation with the regional vice president of his sales division and a cluster of local commercial influencers. I watched his posture. He leaned in, nodded thoughtfully, and delivered a hearty, rehearsed laugh at the exact appropriate intervals. He was working the room, utilizing our decade of marriage as a prop to elevate his professional standing. He wanted his superiors to see a devoted, stable family man, a man who possessed the moral fiber required for an executive promotion. He believed his timeline was immaculate. He thought his forged home equity line of credit was safely hidden, and his mistress Natalie was quietly waiting in her newly purchased luxury condominium. He assumed the cheap grocery store carnations and the fake tax documents he brought to my kitchen had neutralized any lingering threat. He felt invincible standing under the warm glow of the chandeliers, waiting for the right moment to blindside me with divorce papers. I did not walk over to greet him. I navigated the perimeter of the ballroom, stopping near a quiet cocktail table. I requested a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. As the cold condensation formed against the glass, a figure separated from the crowd and glided toward me. Helen wore a flowing silver evening gown. Her hair was styled into an immaculate, rigid structure that defied the natural laws of gravity. She offered a bright, synthetic smile that stretched the skin tight across her cheekbones. She reached out and patted my arm with feigned maternal affection. "You look very nice tonight, Rosa," she said, her tone carrying that familiar thin layer of condescension. "We are so thrilled to host this beautiful evening for you and Bradley. Family is the most important investment we can make." I looked at the woman who had happily celebrated a secret 4-year-old grandson behind my back. But my focus did not remain on her artificial smile. My gaze drifted downward, locking onto the left lapel of her silver gown. Pinned to the silk fabric, catching the light from the overhead fixtures, was a distinct piece of jewelry. It was an intricate gold setting clutching a deep, vivid green gemstone. It was my late grandmother's vintage emerald brooch. The breath paused in my lungs. My pulse maintained a steady, deliberate rhythm, but a sharp, freezing clarity washed over my mind. My grandmother had left me that heirloom in her will. I kept it safely stored in a velvet box inside my bedroom vanity. Helen had visited my townhouse last month, claiming she needed to use the restroom. She had walked into my private sanctuary, opened my jewelry box, and extracted a priceless piece of my history. "I am just borrowing this for the evening's aesthetic," Helen whispered, noticing my fixed stare. "It matches the silver tone of my dress so perfectly. I knew you would not mind sharing a little bit of your heritage to help elevate the family image tonight." She was not just wearing a piece of jewelry. She was wearing my stolen lineage to decorate the stage where her son planned to execute my financial ruin. The sheer, breathtaking entitlement required to steal an heirloom and wear it to a party honoring the victim defied standard logic. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or demand she unpin the gold clasp. Noise is the enemy of accuracy. Confronting a thief over an accessory while holding the blueprints to their systemic destruction is a tactical waste of energy. I offered her a tight, chilling smile. The expression did not reach my eyes. "It looks exactly how it is supposed to look, Helen," I replied, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly measured. The subtext flew right over her head. To her, it sounded like a compliment. To me, it was a factual observation. The emerald looked exactly like stolen property pinned to the chest of a fraudster. Helen exhaled a soft, satisfied breath, believing she had successfully navigated the exchange. She patted my arm one final time and drifted back into the crowd to mingle with the country club board members. I turned my attention away from my mother-in-law and surveyed the other side of the ballroom. Vanessa was standing near the outdoor terrace doors. My sister-in-law wore a designer cocktail dress she could not afford on her own merit. She was surrounded by a small, captive audience of affluent corporate wives and local executives. She held a glass of wine by the delicate stem, gesturing grandly as she spoke. I walked closer, remaining just outside her direct line of sight, and listened to the cadence of her pitch. "It is just so validating to finally secure the commercial space," Vanessa announced, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "The downtown demographic is desperate for a premier boutique fitness studio. When my funding cleared this week, I knew the universe was aligning to support my vision. We are going to redefine the local wellness market." The executives nodded politely, murmuring their approval. A woman wearing a diamond tennis bracelet asked about the initial capital required to launch such an ambitious project. Vanessa offered a serene, practiced grin. "I was fortunate enough to secure a private investment," she explained. "Someone who truly believes in my potential provided the seed capital to cover the escrow." The irony was structural and immaculate. She was standing in a room full of genuine business leaders, bragging about her entrepreneurial brilliance. She was oblivious to the fact that her private investment was a forged $215,000 loan stolen from her sister-in-law. She did not know that the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division was currently tracking every single dollar filtering through her shell corporation. She thought she was building a fitness empire. She was actually financing her own federal wire fraud indictment. Every Pilates reformer she ordered and every month of rent she paid to her commercial landlord generated a fresh digital tracking tag for the federal agents. I stood near the edge of the room holding my glass of sparkling water. The heavy, gold-embossed gift box rested securely under my arm. I watched my husband perform his devoted routine. I watched my mother-in-law parade my stolen emerald brooch across the dance floor. I watched my sister-in-law construct a federal prison cell out of stolen equity and unearned arrogance. They were a closed ecosystem of delusion, entirely blinded by their own unyielding greed. They believed the ground beneath their feet was solid rock. They did not realize they were standing on the extreme edge of a sheer precipice, waiting for the spotlight to validate their illusions. The string quartet finished their classical arrangement. The catering staff began clearing the appetizer plates. The event coordinator signaled to the lighting technician. The main chandeliers dimmed, casting a focused amber glow over the central dance floor. A microphone stand was positioned near the head table. The time for silent observation had officially concluded. The theater was fully packed. The actors were on stage, and the audience was waiting for the opening monologue. I took one final sip of water and prepared to hand them the script. The classical arrangement performed by the hired string quartet faded into a lingering, resonant silence. The catering staff retreated to the perimeter of the ballroom, their silver serving trays resting against their hips. The amber illumination from the heavy crystal chandeliers seemed to focus entirely on the center stage. My husband stood on the elevated wooden platform, holding a crystal champagne flute in his right hand. He raised a silver cocktail spoon and tapped the metal against the delicate rim of the glass. The sharp, rhythmic chime cut through the low hum of affluent networking, commanding immediate attention from the crowded floor. 200 guests turned their focus toward the front of the room. Bradley wore a tailored black tuxedo that projected the effortless charm and rigid authority of a rising corporate executive. His posture was relaxed, yet dominant. He understood the intricate optics of a country club gathering. This lavish reception was not a celebration of our 10-year marital history. It was a carefully engineered public relations campaign. Bradley needed his regional sales directors, his wealthy neighbors, and his mother's influential social circle to witness this performance. He needed them to serve as character witnesses during the impending divorce proceedings. He wanted them to testify that he was a devoted, flawless provider who tried everything to salvage his union before his unstable wife forced his hand. "Thank you all for gathering here tonight," Bradley began. His voice resonated through the high-fidelity audio system, rich with manufactured emotion. A decade is a significant milestone. 10 years of shared dreams, shared challenges, and unwavering partnership. He paused, scanning the audience, ensuring he made direct eye contact with his corporate superiors seated near the front row. He was selling them a narrative of domestic stability. A man who anchors his household is a man who can anchor a regional sales division. He did not look like a man who had forged his wife's signature on a $215,000 home equity line of credit. He did not look like a man funding a 4-year-old secret son and a luxury condominium for his mistress using a shell corporation. "Marriage is built on a foundation of loyalty," he continued, placing his free hand over his heart. "It requires sacrifice. It requires standing by your partner when the world tests your resolve." He looked down at me, seated at the primary table. His dark eyes were wide, brimming with synthetic tears. "Rosa has been my anchor. Her support has been the quiet strength guiding our family through every storm. I wanted to host this vow renewal to publicly declare my devotion to her and to remind everyone in this room that our bond is unbreakable." A soft, collective murmur of admiration rippled through the ballroom. The wives of the corporate executives dabbed the corners of their eyes with pristine linen napkins. They were swooning over the sheer romance of the lie. 2 chairs away from me, Helen sat beaming with unearned pride. My mother-in-law wore a flowing silver gown, and pinned to her left lapel was my late grandmother's vintage emerald brooch. She patted her chest, her fingers grazing the stolen heirloom, playing the role of the overwhelmed matriarch. Across the table, Vanessa leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine. My sister-in-law looked incredibly smug, secure in the delusion that her boutique fitness studio lease was successfully funded by laundered equity. They were all bathing in the warm glow of Bradley's fabricated integrity. "Please, darling Bradley," said his voice, cracking with rehearsed perfection. He extended his hand toward me. "Join me up here." The room erupted into polite, sustained applause. The spotlight shifted, catching my figure in the chair. I did not hesitate. I picked up the heavy, gold-embossed anniversary gift box resting on the white tablecloth in front of me. The thick cardstock felt substantial beneath my fingers. It contained the Certified Internal Revenue Service honeypot confirmations, the forensic handwriting report proving my duress signature, the state registry filings for Vanessa's shell company, and the printed transcript of his mistress confessing to federal bank fraud. I topped the stack with the formal divorce petition and a 24-hour eviction notice for the luxury condo. I stood up. My posture was rigid and authoritative. I wore a structured charcoal blazer and tailored trousers. It was my professional armor. I did not walk with the bashful hesitation of a swooning, overwhelmed wife. I navigated the narrow spaces between the round banquet tables with the measured, deliberate cadence of a senior commercial bank auditor entering a hostile deposition. The wooden stairs leading to the platform felt solid beneath my low heels. I ascended the steps, stepping into the blinding glare of the stage lights. Bradley stepped forward to meet me. He reached out, aiming to pull me into a theatrical embrace, eager to secure the photographic evidence for his social media channels. I stopped just outside his physical reach. I shifted the gold box to my left arm, creating a barrier. He lowered his hands, a brief flicker of genuine confusion passing behind his eyes. He assumed I was merely nervous about the public speaking arrangement. He offered a tight, encouraging nod and handed me the microphone. The metal cylinder was warm from his grip. I looked out over the sea of faces. 200 affluent guests stared back at me, their expressions molded into polite expectation. I saw the regional vice presidents checking their luxury watches. I saw the country club board members waiting for the emotional climax of the evening. I saw Helen touching my grandmother's emerald, using my history to decorate her fraud. I saw Vanessa checking her cellular phone, likely tracking a shipment of imported yoga mats purchased with tagged federal funds. They were waiting for me to recite my assigned lines. They expected a tearful declaration of gratitude. They expected the reliable cash machine to validate their illusion. Bradley is correct about one specific concept, I said. My voice carried through the surround sound speakers, stripping away the ambient warmth of the room. The tone was flat, clinical, and devoid of any sentimental inflection. A successful partnership is indeed built on a foundation of loyalty. But loyalty is a hollow, useless metric without the framework of total transparency. The polite smiles in the front row faltered. The applause had died moments ago, but the subsequent silence grew heavy, pressurized by the sudden, sharp shift in my vocal register. The executives recognized the tone immediately. It was the sound of a corporate audit commencing. Bradley shifted his weight. A thin layer of perspiration materialized on his forehead, catching the stage lights. He glanced at the sound technician in the back corner, then looked back at me, his jaw tightening. This was not the script he had drafted. He expected submission. He was receiving an indictment. I turned to face my husband. I did not raise my voice. I did not display a single ounce of emotional distress. Noise is the enemy of accuracy, and I required the audience to hear every single syllable of my arithmetic. I held the heavy gold-embossed box out toward his chest. You spoke eloquently about the sacrifices required to maintain our household. I continued maintaining unyielding eye contact. You spoke about securing our future and protecting our foundation. I believe an anniversary of this magnitude demands an exchange of tangible, verifiable value. Bradley looked down at the elegant packaging. His breathing hitched, but a greedy, reflexive instinct caused him to reach out his hands. He took the box. He assumed the heavy gold foil contained an expensive mechanical watch or a set of custom platinum cufflinks. He believed his preemptive gaslighting in my kitchen earlier that week had worked perfectly. He thought I was handing him a reward for his flawless deception. He thought he had won. This box contains the exact blueprint of our next chapter, I stated. I lowered the microphone slightly, forcing the captivated audience to strain and listen to the verdict. It contains the routing numbers, the property deeds, and the recorded confessions that define the true structural foundation of this family. I took a half step back, leaving him isolated in the center of the spotlight. He held the box awkwardly, his thumbs pressing into the satin ribbon. The blood began to drain from his face as the sheer metallic coldness of my words penetrated his arrogance. I want you to open your gift. Right here, Bradley, I instructed, projecting my voice across the quiet, breathless ballroom. Open it in front of your corporate directors, your mother, and your sister, because the documents inside that box are about to redefine the entire trajectory of your life. Bradley stood under the harsh amber stage lights holding the heavy gold embossed box. He rested his thumb against the smooth edge of the lid. He He believed he was holding a luxury timepiece or a set of custom platinum cufflinks. He believed his preemptive gaslighting attempt earlier in the week had worked flawlessly. He assumed I was handing him a tangible reward for his flawless deception. He reached for the satin ribbon. His fingers hooked the flawless fabric, pulling the knot apart. The dark ribbon fell away, slipping over his tailored tuxedo jacket and dropping onto the wooden platform. He lifted the thick cardstock lid, expecting to find velvet and polished metal. He found a dense stack of certified legal paper. I watched his dark eyes scan the top document. It was the formal petition for dissolution of marriage resting directly above the 24-hour eviction notice drafted for his mistress. Beneath those distinct warnings lay the forensic handwriting analysis proving his coercion and the certified digital access logs tracing his bank fraud. The healthy flush of his skin drained swiftly, leaving a sickly, ashen pallor. His jaw slackened. The polished regional sales director persona crumbled into dust. His breathing became a series of shallow, ragged gasps. He gripped the edges of the box so tight the thick cardboard began to buckle under the pressure. I did not yield the microphone. I did not lower my gaze. I turned my attention away from my paralyzed husband and addressed the 200 corporate superiors, affluent neighbors, and extended relatives seated in the ballroom. A true partnership requires a clean ledger. I stated, my voice carrying a cold, rhythmic cadence through the surround sound speakers. Last week, my husband initiated a $250,000 transaction without my knowledge. He forged my signature on a home equity line of credit to extract $215,000 from my premarital property. A collective murmur rippled through the front tables. The executives who had just applauded his marital devotion now stared at him with narrowed, calculating eyes. Affluent professionals detest financial liability. They recognized a sinking ship, and they began calculating their distance from the wreckage. I continued delivering the arithmetic, ensuring every guest understood the depth of the betrayal. He did not steal my equity to settle an unexpected debt, I explained, projecting my tone to reach the back of the banquet hall. He stole it to purchase a luxury condominium for a woman named Natalie. He required a permanent shelter for the 4-year-old biological son he has kept hidden for the entirety of our marriage. The silence that descended upon the Maryland Country Club was suffocating. It was a pressurized vacuum. Bradley stumbled, taking a half step backward. He looked down at the executives he had spent years trying to impress. The regional vice president of his sales division, a man who valued integrity clauses and corporate optics, physically pushed his chair away from the stage. The executives were distancing themselves from a toxic asset. They were severing their ties. I shifted my focus to the round table near the outdoor terrace doors. Vanessa sat frozen, her glass of white wine suspended near her chin. My sister-in-law believed she had successfully laundered the stolen capital through her newly formed limited liability company to fund her boutique fitness studio. She had been boasting to local executives about her brilliant entrepreneurial vision. I needed to correct her accounting error. The stolen capital did not vanish into the shadows, I announced, my tone flat and unyielding. The moment I discovered the unauthorized lien, I contacted the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I officially surrendered the corporate details and flagged the destination account as a federal honeypot, I informed the crowd. Every dollar routed through Vanessa's Shell Corporation has been tagged and tracked across state lines. The studio lease you secured and the condominium closing scheduled for tomorrow are currently being seized by federal agents. You financed your own indictments. Vanessa dropped her wine glass. The thin crystal shattered against the imported floor tiles, spilling pale liquid across the pristine carpet. She raised her trembling hands to her face, realizing her fake entrepreneurial empire was actually a federal trap. She had purchased designer fitness equipment and signed commercial contracts using marked government bait. Her curated social media aesthetic was incinerated. She looked toward the stage, silently begging her older brother to fix the disaster. Bradley could not fix anything. He was staring at the floor, trapped in his own ruin. I turned my attention away from my sister-in-law and focused on the matriarch. Helen sat in the front row, her rigid, immaculately styled hair trembling as she shook. She had organized this extravagant country club reception to project a flawless image of maternal success. She wanted her affluent peers to witness her son's triumph. She intended to use this high-profile event to secure character witnesses for his impending divorce strategy. Instead, she had gathered her entire social circle to witness his public execution. I walked to the edge of the wooden platform, looking down at my mother-in-law. Pinned to the lapel of her silver evening gown was my late grandmother's vintage emerald brooch. The deep, vivid green gemstone caught the glare of the spotlight. Helen had scavenged my private jewelry box, claiming she needed to borrow my history to elevate her aesthetic. She used my heritage to decorate the stage where her son planned to destroy my financial foundation. "Helen," I said, projecting my voice so every country club board member could hear the directive, "you are currently wearing a priceless family heirloom that you extracted from my bedroom without my permission." Helen gasped, pressing her hand against her chest, covering the gold setting. She looked around the room, searching for an ally. She found only horrified stares from the affluent women she had spent decades trying to impress. The country club elite despise scandal, and they detest theft. They were looking at her as if she were a common shoplifter dressed in formal wear. The unearned superiority she wore like a second skin dissolved. "Unpin the emerald brooch right now, Helen," I instructed, my voice dropping into a localized, lethal register, "or my next conversation will be with the local police department regarding the possession of stolen property in front of 200 witnesses." The threat of law enforcement shattered her final defensive barrier. Helen let out a jagged, humiliated sob. Her trembling fingers fumbled with the intricate gold clasp. She lacked the coordination to undo the mechanism smoothly. The fine metal pin caught against the silk fabric of her expensive gown. She pulled frantically, tearing a small hole in the silver dress. The clasp finally yielded. She stepped forward, reaching up toward the edge of the stage. She held the vintage jewelry out toward me, her hand shaking so severely the gold setting rattled. I reached down and plucked the item from her palm. The metal was warm from her body heat. I inspected the deep green stone, ensuring no damage had occurred, before sliding the piece safely into the pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer. I stood tall on the platform, surveying the room. The curated, pristine family image was shattered into 1,000 irrecoverable pieces. Bradley remained isolated near the podium, clutching the gold box of his own destruction. Vanessa wept near the broken glass, surrounded by executives who were actively retreating from her table. Helen slumped in her chair, stripped of her stolen elegance and her social standing. I did not feel a rush of vindictive joy. I felt the cold, structural peace of a balanced ledger. I had executed the audit. The liabilities were exposed, and the fraudulent accounts were closed. I turned my back on the podium and began walking down the wooden stairs. The social performance was dead, but the federal consequences were already in motion. The government agents were preparing to collect their evidence, and the cleanup process would not require my participation. I descended the wooden stairs holding the emerald brooch securely within the pocket of my blazer. The atmosphere inside the ballroom was a pressurized vacuum of stunned disbelief. The regional vice presidents and local influencers who had gathered to celebrate a decade of manufactured marital bliss were now trapped inside a sprawling crime scene. They sat frozen at their banquet tables, processing the legal implications of the admissions they had just witnessed. I did not return to my assigned seat. I walked past the shattered wine glass at Vanessa's table and bypassed Helen, who remained slumped in her chair, weeping into her hands. I moved toward the grand entrance at the rear of the hall. The tactical execution was complete, but the statutory cleanup required external participation. Before I could reach the exit, the heavy mahogany double doors swung inward with a forceful, synchronized movement. The ambient murmur of the crowd evaporated instantly. The string quartet players lowered their instruments. A sudden, sharp draft of cool autumn air rushed into the sweltering room, followed by a distinct, unyielding presence. A coordinated team of federal agents strode into the ballroom. They did not wear tactical vests or carry visible weapons, but their authority was absolute and undeniable. They moved with the cold, predatory efficiency of a unit executing a finalized operation. The lead officer, a tall woman with a severe expression and a crisp dark suit, held a leather portfolio. Trailing just behind her were 3 men wearing windbreakers, bearing the stark yellow acronyms of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The coordination was flawless. Earlier that week, I had instructed Evelyn, my corporate attorney, to transmit the confirmed honeypot data and the forged deed documentation directly to her contacts within the federal task force. The agents were aware of the country club gathering. They recognized the tactical advantage of executing an arrest in a controlled, enclosed environment where the suspects lacked the ability to access their compromised accounts or destroy secondary evidence. They allowed the social performance to conclude before initiating the legal extraction. The lead agent bypassed the bewildered catering staff and the startled event coordinators. She marched directly down the center aisle, navigating the narrow spaces between the round tables with determined focus. The affluent guests recoiled, pulling their chairs closer to the linens, eager to avoid any accidental association with the approaching authorities. The agent stopped at the base of the elevated stage. Bradley remained paralyzed near the podium, clutching the gold-embossed gift box. His tailored tuxedo offered zero protection against the sudden, terrifying reality of federal intervention. Bradley James, the agent, announced, her voice echoing sharply across the silent room. She did not utilize a microphone, but the command carried the weight of a gavel striking wood. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and interstate money laundering. The blood that had briefly returned to his face vanished entirely. He took a stuttering half-step backward, his polished leather shoes slipping slightly on the polished wood. He looked down at the agent, his eyes wide and vacant. His jaw worked uselessly, but he could not formulate a defense. The arrogant regional sales director who believed he could outsmart his wife and the banking system was reduced to a hollow, terrified shell. He dropped the gold box. The heavy cardstock hit the stage floor, spilling the forensic handwriting report and the eviction notice across the platform. 2 FBI agents ascended the stairs. They flanked him, grabbing his arms with practiced professional force. They pulled his hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of steel handcuffs engaging around his wrists pierced the quiet ballroom. The mechanical click was definitive. It was the sound of a carefully constructed timeline permanently terminating. Vanessa, who had been sobbing near the shattered glass, pushed her chair back and attempted to stand. Her designer cocktail dress snagged on the edge of the table, but she ignored the tearing fabric. She looked toward the terrace doors, calculating the distance to the exit. She did not possess the stamina or the intellect to evade a federal task force. Vanessa Smith, the lead agent, continued turning her attention toward my sister-in-law. You are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering and operating an illicit shell corporation. A third agent stepped forward, intercepting Vanessa before she could take a single step toward the terrace. He secured her wrists, forcing her arms behind her back. Vanessa let out a shrill, hysterical shriek. Her knees buckled, and she slumped against the agent, her weight entirely unsupported. She wailed, demanding to call a lawyer, screaming that she was merely an innocent business owner targeted by a jealous relative. Her protests were useless noise echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The agents ignored her theatrics, focusing entirely on the procedural extraction. Helen watched her 2 children being shackled in front of her entire social circle. The matriarch who valued outward aesthetic perfection above all genuine human connection was witnessing the ultimate public humiliation. She pushed herself out of her chair, her legs trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of the table for support. "You cannot do this," Helen cried, her voice thin and ragged. "This is a private event. We paid for this reception. You are ruining everything." The lead agent turned to face my mother-in-law. Her expression remained entirely stoic, an impenetrable wall of bureaucratic indifference. "Regarding the funding for this reception, ma'am," the agent stated, consulting a document in her portfolio, We have received confirmation that the deposit and the catering fees for this venue were paid using a routing number directly tied to the flagged Summit Logistics ledger. Helen stopped breathing. Her eyes widened as the mathematical reality crushed her remaining illusions. Those funds are considered the proceeds of a federal crime, the agent explained, her tone flat and unyielding. Therefore, the capital utilized to host this gathering is subject to immediate government seizure. The venue management has been notified that the payment is void. You are personally liable for the outstanding balance of this event. Helen collapsed. She did not faint, but her body surrendered to the overwhelming weight of the financial disaster. She fell backward into the velvet chair, burying her face in her hands. She wept with a loud, jagged intensity. She realized the federal seizure extended far beyond the luxury condominium and the boutique fitness studio. The extravagant vow renewal she had weaponized to project her maternal dominance was now a massive, unfunded debt resting entirely on her shoulders. She was bankrupt, both socially and financially, in a matter of seconds. The affluent attendees who had spent the evening swooning over Bradley's fabricated devotion now scrambled to document his destruction. Dozens of smartphones were elevated above the tables recording the arrests. The wives of the corporate executives captured high-definition video of my husband being marched down the center aisle in handcuffs. The local influencers recorded Vanessa sobbing as she was escorted toward the lobby. The footage would circulate through the elite suburban networks before the night concluded. The family image was permanently incinerated. I stood near the exit doors observing the procession. Bradley walked past me, escorted by the two agents. He kept his head down, his gaze fixed on the carpeted floor. He did not look up. He did not attempt to offer a final apology or a desperate plea for mercy. He knew the ledger was closed. The man who forged my signature to fund a secret parallel life was now walking toward a federal holding cell. He would lose his regional director position by Monday morning. He would lose his freedom for a mandatory minimum sentence. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel a rush of vindictive triumph. The emotional toll of the betrayal had been processed and discarded during the silent investigative grind. I felt the cold, profound relief of a professional who has successfully mitigated a catastrophic liability. The parasite had been surgically excised from the host. I turned away from the spectacle. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open and stepped into the grand lobby. The air was cool and smelled of fresh floral arrangements. I walked past the coat check attendant retrieving my tailored charcoal coat. I slipped it over my shoulders, ensuring the vintage emerald brooch remained safely secured in my pocket. I handed my ticket to the valet and waited for my sedan. The process functioned flawlessly. The quiet auditor relied on documentation, established unyielding boundaries, and allowed the loud, arrogant predators to dig their own graves. Now they were burying themselves while I drove away. 6 months have passed since the amber chandeliers dimmed inside that Maryland country club. The crisp autumn chill has yielded to the gentle warmth of an early Baltimore spring. I am sitting at my glass desk on the 42nd floor of the commercial banking high-rise. The morning sunlight pours through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, sharp angles across the carpeted room. The environment is orderly. The air smells of roasted espresso and fresh printer toner. It is the sterile, comforting scent of a balanced ledger. I reach up and trace the edge of my left lapel. Pinned to the dark charcoal fabric of my tailored blazer is my late grandmother's vintage emerald brooch. The deep green gemstone catches the morning light, refracting a brilliant spectrum across the office wall. The gold setting feels solid and permanent against my collarbone. It no longer resembles a stolen prop pinned to the chest of a fraudster. It is a reclaimed piece of my history. It serves as a quiet daily reminder that establishing an unyielding perimeter is the only effective defense against a parasite. The aftermath of the weaponized vow renewal proceeded with the cold, rigid efficiency of a federal audit. When you supply government agents with a pristine paper trail, they do not waste time untangling emotional family disputes. They follow the routing numbers. The prosecution did not require my testimony. The documentation I provided inside the gold-embossed anniversary box spoke on my behalf. Bradley never returned to his corner office. His tenure as a regional sales director terminated the moment the Federal Bureau of Investigation escorted him out of the ballroom in steel handcuffs. His corporate superiors, the very men he invited to witness his fabricated marital devotion, immediately severed all ties. They erased his name from the company directory and cooperated fully with the state prosecutors. My husband attempted to negotiate a plea agreement, but leveraging a spouse's premarital property through forgery to fund an interstate money laundering scheme carries severe statutory penalties. He traded his bespoke tuxedo and his leased sports car for a standard-issue uniform inside a federal penitentiary. He is currently serving a mandatory minimum sentence. His sprawling shadow life collapsed, leaving him confined to a concrete cell. The federal honeypot I established dismantled his sister's illusions with equal precision. Vanessa genuinely believed she had outsmarted the system. She thought forming a limited liability company provided an impenetrable shield for the stolen $215,000. She failed to understand that every yoga mat she purchased and every lease agreement she signed generated a digital tracking tag. The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division seized the Summit Logistics accounts before the sun rose on Sunday morning. Agents arrived at her downtown commercial space and confiscated the imported fitness equipment to pay federal restitution. Her curated entrepreneurial persona evaporated. The local influencers who once drank her expensive champagne quickly distanced themselves, scrubbing any mention of her name from their social media profiles. The luxury shelter Bradley attempted to secure for his mistress met an identical fate. The 24-hour eviction notice drafted by my corporate attorney operated flawlessly. Natalie woke up the morning after the gala expecting to finalize the escrow on her premium condominium. Instead, she faced a legal extraction team representing the independent fiduciary of my blind trust. Natalie realized the fraudulent equity funding her lifestyle was gone. She understood that her wealthy benefactor was sitting in a holding cell, unable to provide another dime for her secret son's private preschool tuition. Loyalty built on stolen capital dissolves the moment the bank accounts freeze. She packed her designer athletic wear, abandoned the city, and fled the state entirely, avoiding any secondary accessory charges by vanishing into obscurity. The most profound descent, however, belonged to the matriarch. Helen had spent 3 decades constructing a flawless suburban facade. She valued her pristine estate and her country club, standing above the character of her own children. She hosted that lavish anniversary reception to project dominance and secure an alibi. The strategy yielded a catastrophic return on investment. The federal seizure of the Summit Logistics ledger voided the payments she utilized to fund the extravagant gathering. The country club management held her personally liable for the outstanding catering fees, the string quartet, and the ballroom rental. The financial hemorrhage did not end with the venue invoices. Defending 2 children against multi-count federal indictments requires premium legal representation. The criminal defense attorneys demanded exorbitant retainers. Helen drained her retirement portfolios. She liquidated her mutual funds. She exhausted every available line of credit, trying to shield her golden children from the consequences of their own greed. The math of her decisions formed a closed loop. She was forced to declare total bankruptcy. The bank foreclosed on the pristine suburban estate. She packed her remaining possessions into cardboard boxes and vacated the property, trading her vaulted ceilings for a cramped rental unit on the outskirts of the city. Her affluent social circle, the women she so desperately wanted to impress, treated her like a contagious liability. Her pristine image shattered into 1,000 irrecoverable pieces. My cellular phone vibrates against the glass surface of my desk. The sudden kinetic motion interrupts the quiet hum of the ventilation system. The screen illuminates, casting a pale glow across my polished workstation. A notification badge appears, displaying an incoming voicemail. The caller identification registers a localized Maryland number. It is Helen. Even after 6 months of absolute silence, my former mother-in-law continues to search for a fractured seam in my perimeter. The transcription software on my device automatically converts the audio message into legible text on the screen. I do not press play. I do not need to hear the ragged, breathless quality of her voice or the synthetic maternal warmth she attempts to project. I simply read the transcribed paragraphs. "Rosa, please," the text reads. "We have lost everything. The legal bills are suffocating us. I know you still have the funds in your trust. You are the only one who can help us survive this. We are family. You cannot just abandon us when we are drowning. Please call me back." The message is a textbook deployment of predatory manipulation. She does not apologize for parading my stolen emerald brooch across a dance floor. She does not express remorse for the forged deed of trust or the counterfeit notary stamp. She ignores the reality that she gleefully subsidized a shadow family using my grueling 60-hour work weeks. She merely expects the reliable cash machine to resume its designated function. She wants me to internalize her synthetic grief, open my digital vault, and hand over the capital I spent my 20s building. I pick up the smartphone. The metallic casing is cool against my palm. I do not type a response explaining why her request is fundamentally unacceptable. Defending a boundary to a parasite only validates their authority to question it. I swipe my thumb across the notification bar. I tap the trash icon. The message vanishes from the screen, leaving no trace of her desperate pleading. I navigate to the contact settings menu and select the block caller function. The digital bridge is permanently severed. I place the device face down on the desk. My personal wealth remains safely insulated within the architectural void of the irrevocable blind trust. The assets are shielded from probate courts, predatory creditors, and the grasping hands of a ruined dynasty. My professional certification as a commercial auditor is secure. My credit score is unblemished. The defensive fortress operated exactly as designed. Society often peddles a highly damaging narrative regarding familial obligation. We are conditioned to believe that blood relations demand perpetual forgiveness, regardless of the severity of the transgression. We are taught that walking away from a toxic dynamic is an admission of failure. But true compassion must begin with self-preservation. I have learned a very specific, unyielding truth. Loyalty without honesty is merely an invitation for exploitation. When you identify individuals who view your stability as an infinite resource to be harvested, you do not negotiate with them. You do not offer them a second chance to strip mine your future. You retreat into the quiet. You gather the routing numbers, the signed contracts, and the empirical data. You build a forensic timeline that cannot be dismantled by emotional theatrics. The process worked flawlessly. I did not need to engage in public screaming matches. I did not need to shatter wine glasses or drop to my knees in despair. I simply stepped out of the way. I established unyielding boundaries, relied on meticulous documentation, and allowed the loud, arrogant predators to dig their own graves. I handed them the shovels, and they performed the labor themselves. I turned my attention back to the dual monitors glowing on my desk. The screens display a fresh set of complex corporate ledgers waiting to be examined. I place my hands on the ergonomic keyboard and begin to type. The quiet professional won by letting the math balance the scales. If you are currently standing on a fragile stage set, subsidizing the illusions of people who refuse to respect your foundation, step off the platform. Stop funding the theater. Drop a comment below, hit the subscribe button, and join us next time on Vega Vengeance. Behind the sun-baked avenues and the meticulously manicured facades of modern American suburbia, a quiet tragedy often plays out far away from the eyes of neighbors. It is a tragedy not born of a sudden, unpredictable disaster, but rather of systemic, long-term failures in parenting and a profound lack of emotional awareness. In the story of Leticia Morris, a corporate trust officer from Arizona, we bear witness to the devastating consequences of a family dynamic built entirely on transactional affection and performative grief. This narrative is not merely a tale of a hijacked funeral or shocking financial betrayal. It is a dark mirror reflecting the catastrophic cost of rescuing one child from their own choices while weaponizing the stability of another. In traditional American culture, there is immense pressure on families to project an image of success, harmony, and visible prestige. The desire to appear perfect can easily warp into a hollow, exhausting competition if fundamental character is sacrificed for mere appearances. For Letizia's mother-in-law, Barbara, her family was never a sanctuary grounded in honesty or fairness. It was a stage set, carefully constructed to hide profound internal decay. Her parenting values were deeply rooted in maintaining this illusion at all costs, raising her children not with a foundation of integrity, but by assigning them rigid, polarized roles that served her own narrative. Jason, the younger son, functioned as the family's chaotic golden child. Despite a string of chronic failures and mounting debts from offshore sports betting, he was consistently rescued by his mother. Barbara viewed his irresponsibility not as a character flaw requiring correction, but as a vulnerability that required her constant maternal protection. But true long-term guidance requires parents to allow their children to face the natural consequences of their actions, teaching them resilience and accountability. By repeatedly subsidizing Jason's chaos, Barbara denied him this fundamental growth. She crippled his emotional development, leaving him entirely unequipped for the realities of adulthood, where debts cannot be indefinitely hidden behind a curated facade. When the water rose too high for Jason, his mother did not teach him how to swim. She stole a life preserver from her eldest son's widow. Letizia's husband, Michael, was a brilliant software architect who had spent his 20s shielding his siblings from the consequences of their own fiscal irresponsibility. In many traditional family structures, for every chaotic child shielded from reality, there is a quiet, reliable sibling forced to absorb the impact and carry the unseen burdens. While the golden child is celebrated or coddled, the reliable child's competence is routinely penalized with heavier loads and dismissed boundaries. Michael's sister Stephanie treated him like a limitless revolving line of credit, viewing standard employment as a temporary inconvenience. This dynamic highlights a severe lack of fairness and emotional awareness in parenting. Parents often view the quiet, steady nature of their responsible child not as a virtue to be nurtured, but as an infinite resource to be harvested. Barbara and Stephanie assumed that because Letizia and Michael paid their own bills and established strict financial boundaries, their assets were simply waiting to be conquered. This lack of emotional awareness culminated in a breathtaking violation of trust the moment Michael's heart stopped beating. Rather than mourning the loss of her firstborn, Barbara treated his sudden, tragic death as a lucrative liquidity event. Utilizing a stale 10-year-old power of attorney document, she drained $45,000 from Michael and Letizia's joint checking account. She used $30,000 of the stolen capital to purchase a Honduran mahogany casket and imported white orchids, engineering a performative public funeral to extract sympathy from affluent tech executives. The remaining $15,000 was funneled directly to Jason to satisfy his violent gambling debts. This act reveals a chilling failure to see children and the spouses they choose as independent individuals with equal rights to respect and security. To Barbara Letizia's grief was an obstacle, and her financial security was an expendable slush fund. The betrayal escalated to an attempted federal crime when Barbara logged into her deceased son's corporate benefits portal from her home computer, attempting to forge a digital signature and reroute a $750,000 life insurance payout directly to Jason. They forgot that true family responsibility is not about hiding mistakes. It is about guiding children through them with integrity. By prioritizing their public reputation over fundamental honesty, they poisoned the very roots of their family tree. They also fundamentally misunderstood the nature of quiet competence. Letizia understood that noise is the enemy of accuracy. When she uncovered the bank fraud and the attempted identity theft, she did not scream or demand a tearful apology. She did not accept the cheap $8 frozen lasagna her mother-in-law brought over in a pathetic attempt to gaslight her into signing away her spousal rights. Instead, she retreated into her professional element, relying on the impenetrable legal fortress of the Morris family irrevocable trust. She built a forensic timeline, relying on documentation rather than emotion to secure systemic justice. Parents who prioritize the illusion of perfection over the arduous work of genuine character building inevitably find themselves standing on fragile ground. The climax of Letizia's story underscores the ultimate failure of parenting, devoid of honesty and fairness. Barbara weaponized her public image, using a country club reception to validate her illusions. It was only fitting that her downfall occurred on that very same stage. By delivering a sleek black mourning envelope filled with evidence of fraud to her mother-in-law during the reception, Letizia forced her in-laws to face the truth in front of the audience they valued above all else. The fallout was clinical and devastating. The stolen money was reversed, the corrupt family attorney faced disbarment, and the golden child was publicly stripped of the vintage watch he had scavenged from a dead man's bedroom. Ultimately, raising children within a traditional family structure must be anchored in truth. True family responsibility means raising children equipped to navigate the world with emotional awareness, integrity, and independence. A family united by fraud is nothing more than a criminal syndicate, sharing a surname, bound together by mutual liabilities, rather than genuine love. A resolution of Letizia's story provides a powerful, unflinching lesson in emotional survival and boundary setting. Sitting in her sunlit home, safe behind the walls of her irrevocable trust, Letizia reflects on a profound, unyielding truth. Grief should never require you to subsidize someone else's greed, and loyalty to the dead does not mean surrendering to the living. Society often places a heavy burden on blood relations, demanding perpetual forgiveness regardless of the transgression. But true compassion must begin with self-preservation. The quiet widow won not through malice, but by simply stepping out of the way and letting the loud relatives dig their own graves, relying on cold facts instead of forced emotions. If this story resonates with you, if you have ever been the reliable one, expected to quietly absorb the damage caused by everyone else, take this as your sign to stand firm. Hand the damage back to the people who created it. Drop a comment below, hit the subscribe button, and join us for the next powerful story on Vega Vengeance. As you reflect on Letizia's journey, look closely at the foundation of your own relationships. Are you building on solid ground? Or are you desperately patching cracks in a stage set that was never meant to hold your weight? When the applause finally dies down and the theater is empty, what remains in the quiet?